In the Nag Hammadi library, recovered from a sealed jar buried in the Egyptian desert in 1945, there is a text the early church fathers spent 3 centuries trying to eliminate, not because it contradicted their theology, not because it was poorly reasoned or historically inaccurate, because it described the actual structure of the cosmos, and in doing so, it handed every human being the precise mechanism for escaping the control system they were born into. That text is the Apocryphon of John, and at its center is a figure Orthodox Christianity never wanted you to understand: Sophia, the divine feminine, the youngest of the eternal emanations. The being whose single independent act of creation produced the demiurge, the archons, the material world, and the human body, all of it cascading from one moment of unbalanced desire. In the next 2 hours, you are going to learn the complete story. The cosmology, the fall, the archons, the body, the practices, the path back, not the mythology, the map. Before the material universe existed, before a single atom of matter was assembled, before the architects of this reality declared themselves gods and began construction on the prison you were born into, there was the pleroma. Most people who have encountered this word translate it loosely as the fullness and move on. That is a mistake. Because the pleroma is not a place. It is not a heaven you travel to after death if you followed the right rules during life. The Gnostic texts are precise and deliberate when they describe it, and precision matters here. The pleroma was a state of complete consciousness. Multiple divine emanations, the Gnostics called them aeons, existed within it in perfect harmonic balance, each one expressing a unique facet of the unknowable source, the monad, the one without qualities, the ground of being that cannot be named without immediately misrepresenting it. Think of it this way: when you become aware of yourself, you haven't created a second person. You've emanated self-awareness. The monad generated the pleroma the same way, not through construction, not through external labor, but through the natural overflowing of infinite consciousness into expression. The source does not diminish. A candle loses wax as it burns. The monad does not. The aeons flow from it the way light radiates from the sun, continuously, effortlessly, without the source losing anything. The Apocryphon of John, which scholars date to approximately the late 2nd century CE, though encoding traditions far older, names these eons systematically. The father, the mother called Barbelo the son, then paired emanations moving outward in what the text describes as a fractal structure of divine consciousness, foreknowledge and incorruptibility, eternal life and truth. The autogenes Christ, then 4 luminaries, Harmazel, Oroyel, Devithai, and Eleleth, each governing a distinct realm of divine awareness. No separation, no scarcity, no death, no time passing and taking things away, no bodies decaying, no desires left unfulfilled, no consciousness fragmenting under the weight of ignorance. This is what the pleroma was, not metaphor, not spiritual poetry, a condition of existence so complete that nothing outside it needed to exist. In the realm governed by the 4th luminary, Eleleth, dwelt Sophia. Her position in this architecture is not incidental. She was the youngest of the aeons, which means she existed at the outermost boundary of the pleroma, the furthest point of emanation from the monad, the edge where divine fullness met the void beyond it. All the other aeons had formed in paired unions, what the Gnostics called syzygies, masculine and feminine principles in perfect mutual balance, active and receptive, projective and formative, each complete because each carried both aspects of divine creativity in conscious relationship with the other. Sophia stood at the boundary alone. Not isolated, she existed within the pleroma's harmony, but positioned at the threshold where the fullness of being looked outward into absolute darkness. And from that threshold, she looked into the void and felt something no other aeon felt with the same intensity. The desire to fill it. The desire to create not through balanced union with her syzygy, not in the established pattern through which every other act of pleromic creation had occurred, but independently. Alone, from her power alone. The Apocryphon of John records her exact thought. The text does not editorialize, it simply reports what she decided, to produce a work by herself, without her consort. This is the hinge point of everything. Not just Gnostic cosmology, everything. The material world you are sitting in right now, the body you are inhabiting, the systems of power that govern your daily life. All of it traces back to this single decision made at the edge of the pleroma before matter existed. Modern interpreters consistently frame this as Sophia's sin, her error, her fall into pride or disobedience. But the Apocryphon itself is more precise than that, and precision matters. The text does not say she was wrong to want to create. It does not say creation was forbidden. It says she acted without polarity. Without the masculine principle that provides structure to the feminine principle's generative power, she provided the formative, receptive, material aspect of creation, but without the projective, ordering, active aspect that gives new creation coherent form. What emerged from that imbalance was not what she intended. It could not have been. When you feed raw creative power into a process without the balancing principle that gives it structure, what you get is power without wisdom, form without understanding, existence without comprehension of its own origin. That is what came out of Sophia's independent act. And what came out changed everything. The Apocryphon of John does not soften what emerged from Sophia's independent creation. The text describes a being with the head of a lion and the body of a serpent, eyes flashing like lightning. A creature of enormous power because it had inherited Sophia's creative capacity directly but fundamentally incomplete, because it lacked the one half of divine polarity that gives consciousness genuine understanding of itself. The Gnostics called this being Yaldabaoth. Some texts call him Saklas, the fool. Others call him Samael, the blind god. Each name points at the same essential condition: immense power, operating in complete ignorance of its own nature. Sophia saw what she had created and was horrified. The Apocryphon says she immediately withdrew her light, retreating upward and repenting not because the act of creation was wrong, but because creating without balance had produced something she had not intended and could not contain. She had generated a being with the full force of divine creative power and none of the wisdom to wield it correctly. Yaldabaoth looked around. He saw Sophia's light withdrawing above him, but he did not understand what he was seeing. He saw no one standing over him because Sophia had pulled back, and he drew the conclusion that made everything that followed inevitable. "I am God," he declared, "and there is no other God beside me." He believed this absolutely. This is not arrogance in the moral sense the word usually carries. This is something more disturbing, genuine ignorance operating with genuine power. He was not lying. He did not know he was wrong. He was a derivative, being an emanation of an emanation. Existing in the shadow of the true divine realm, he had no capacity to perceive, and he could not see past his own limitation. He had Sophia's creative force, but not her wisdom. He had the tools to build worlds, but not the comprehension to build them correctly. Now, I want to be direct about something here. I have spent a considerable amount of time with the Nag Hammadi texts. I came to this material initially through our video on the full story of the Pleroma, which many of you have already seen. And what strikes me every time I return to the Apocryphon's account of Yaldabaoth is how this is not a mythological villain. This is a pattern, a recognizable pattern. Power without self-knowledge produces control systems. Every time, in every domain of human experience, the Gnostics were not writing fantasy. They were mapping a structural reality. I'm Daniel, and if you have been following this channel, you know we do not deal in comfortable summaries. We go into the actual architecture. Yaldabaoth did not stop at the declaration. He began building. Using the divine creative force he had inherited from Sophia, power he did not earn, did not develop, but received accidentally. At the moment of his birth, he constructed what the Gnostics described as the lower realms, the material cosmos. The structure of existence below the Pleroma, and the first thing he built was not matter itself. The first thing he built was governance. He created the 7 archons. The Apocryphon names them precisely: Athoth, Hermas, Kalila Umbri, Yabel, Adonaiu, Cain, Abel. 7 beings, each stationed in one of the 7 classical planetary spheres, each given dominion over a specific domain of material consciousness. Athoth in Saturn's sphere, Hermas in Jupiter's, Kalila Umbri in Mars, Yabel in the Sunday, Adonaiu in Venus, Cain in Mercury, Abel in the Moon. These were not metaphors for psychological tendencies. The Gnostics taught that they were actual beings with consciousness and will, positioned in the architecture of the cosmos to govern every soul passing between the Pleroma and the material realm. Each archon carries a specific quality and imprints it onto descending consciousness: the melancholic heaviness of Saturn, the expansive pride of Jupiter, the aggressive force of Mars, the vain self-importance of the Sun, the consuming desire of Venus, the calculating cunning of Mercury, the unstable reactivity of the Moon. You carry all of these imprints. Every human does. The Gnostics did not see this as abstract astrology. They saw it as a documentation of what was done to your consciousness before you arrived in a body. Then Yaldabaoth created 365 angels, one for every degree of the zodiac, one for every day of the solar year. The Apocryphon names dozens of them and describes their functions with the same systematic precision it applies to everything else. These beings govern specific aspects of material existence: biological processes, emotional patterns, weather systems, the movements of consciousness through incarnation. When modern astrology describes planetary influences on human behavior, it is working with a vastly simplified version of this ancient Gnostic map. The difference is that astrology generally treats these influences as destiny. The Gnostics treated them as a prison architecture, and they developed specific techniques for recognizing when an archonic force was operating in your consciousness and withdrawing consent from it in real time. The cosmos Yaldabaoth built was not random, it was structured, and it was structured for a purpose: to contain divine light and prevent it from returning to the pleroma. Not out of malice in the conventional sense, remember, Yaldabaoth did not understand what divine light was or where his own power came from. He was simply doing what ignorant power does, building systems that perpetuate themselves, demanding worship, denying anything existed above him. This is the reality you were born into, not a neutral arena of experience. A structured containment field, built by a being with divine creative capacity and no divine wisdom, governed by 7 powers that have been running their programs on human consciousness for longer than recorded history. The question the Gnostics spent centuries answering was simple: given this, what do you do? Here is something that should stop you entirely. The architects of the human body were not the same as the architects of the pleroma. The human body was not a gift from the highest divine realm. It was not lovingly designed by the unknowable source as a vessel for divine experience. The Apocryphon of John describes with precise, systematic detail who built the human body, which part each being constructed, and most critically why. Yaldabaoth and his archons looked into the waters of the void and saw a reflection. The Gnostics called what they saw the anthropos, the original divine human template existing as pure consciousness in the pleroma above. The powers of the pleroma had allowed this reflection to appear in the lower realms deliberately as a lure, a blueprint that would trick the archons into creating something capable of housing divine consciousness, something that could then be used for Sophia's redemption. The archons saw the reflection and did not understand what they were looking at. They thought it was an original form, something they had discovered, rather than something projected toward them from above. Yaldabaoth said to his powers, "Come, let us create a human being after the image we have seen," and they did, each contributing a component. The text is specific. The first archon, Athoth, formed the bone structure, the skeletal frame. The second, Harmas, formed the sinew body, the connective tissue that enables movement. The third created the flesh, body, muscle, and organ tissue. The fourth, the marrow body, the blood-producing centers. The fifth, the blood body, the circulatory system. The sixth, the skin body, the boundary layer between inside and outside. The seventh, the hair body, the external growths. 7 archons, 7 layers of biological architecture. And when they were finished, Adam lay on the ground inanimate, fully assembled, structurally complete, biologically inert. Because the archons could build form but could not generate life, they had the creative force Yaldabaoth had inherited from Sophia, enough force to assemble matter into sophisticated configurations. But they did not have the animating principle that makes consciousness inhabit a body. They had designed a container. They could not produce what goes inside it. A viewer commented on our recent Pleroma video that studying the Nag Hammadi texts had helped certain ideas finally come together, that the puzzle was fitting together. That comment stayed with me because this is precisely the moment in the Apocryphon where the puzzle reveals its most disturbing piece. Not just that the body was built by hostile intelligences, but what happened next. The powers of the Pleroma above, recognizing the situation, spoke to Yaldabaoth. They deceived him. The text uses that word without apology. They said, "Breathe into his face some of your spirit and the body will arise." Yaldabaoth did not realize what he was about to do. He did not understand that the spirit within him, the creative animating force he possessed, was Sophia's divine light. The light he had received from her at the moment of his birth. The light he had been operating with his entire existence without knowing where it came from. He breathed into Adam's face, and Adam arose. Not merely animated, illuminated. The divine light that Yaldabaoth had carried since his creation, the light that was always Sophia's and never truly his, transferred into the human body. Adam stood up, and the text records what the Archon saw when he did. He was more intelligent than they were, more luminous. His divine spark exceeded the consciousness of the beings who had built his body. The Archon saw this and became afraid. Think about that for a moment. The prison guards became afraid of their prisoner. Because they had made a fundamental error, they had used divine light to animate a form that now carried more of that light than they themselves possessed. They had inadvertently created something that could escape the very system they were building. So they cast Adam into sleep, not physical sleep, archonic unconsciousness. The systematic suppression of divine awareness. The Gnostics called this the Great Forgetting, the ongoing condition of human consciousness running biological programs while the divine spark remains dormant, unrecognized, buried under layers of survival instinct and archonically installed identity. Your body is not evil. The Gnostics did not teach contempt for matter, but they were absolutely clear about what matter is, an archonic technology. The biological drives you experience, hunger, fear, territorial aggression, reproductive compulsion, status-seeking, are not your drives in any ultimate sense. They are programs installed by the builders of your body to ensure that your attention remains oriented toward survival and reproduction rather than toward the recognition of what you actually are. The tension you feel between something that wants to transcend and something that keeps dragging you back into material concerns, that is not personal failure, that is not weakness of character. That is the structural condition of divine light operating inside an archonic vehicle. It is cosmic architecture, not moral inadequacy. This changes everything about how you work with your body. You do not hate it. You do not punish it or deny it in hopes of becoming spiritual. You operate it consciously as a temporary vehicle, a sophisticated biological mechanism you are currently inhabiting, while refusing to allow its programs to define what you are. Sophia's light is inside this body. It was placed there by the very act of archonic deception that was supposed to contain it. And that light has been waiting dormant but not dead, present but unrecognized for the consciousness inside this vehicle to finally look inward and remember what it is. That act of recognition is where everything changes. The Apocryphon of John does not stop at the creation of the material world. It goes further. It names names. It maps structures. It describes, with systematic precision, exactly what was built to keep you here and who built it. Yaldabaoth did not rule alone. The moment he established dominion over the lower realm, he created subordinates, 7 of them. The Apocryphon calls them archons, rulers, governors, powers stationed at specific levels of the material cosmos, with specific functions and specific qualities they impose on consciousness passing through their domains. These were not abstract forces. The Gnostics taught they were literal beings, conscious entities with will, with agenda, with the capacity to shape human experience from the inside out. Not metaphors for psychological states, actual intelligences governing what the ancient world called the 7 planetary spheres. The text gives them names. Athos governed the sphere of Saturn, Hermas governed Jupiter, Kalila Uumbri governed Mars, Yabel governed the Sunday, Adonaios governed Venus, Cain governed Mercury, Abel governed the moon. 7 spheres, 7 rulers, 7 layers of filtering between human consciousness and the pleroma above. Here is what matters about this structure. When a soul descends from the pleroma into incarnation in the material realm, it passes through each of these 7 spheres. And at each sphere, the archon stationed there imprints the descending consciousness with a specific quality. Saturn imprints heaviness, restriction, the sense of time grinding everything down. Jupiter imprints expansive pride, the belief that size and power equal worth. Mars imprints aggression, the drive toward conflict. The Sun imprints vanity, the performance of identity. Venus imprints desire, the ache for reunion through physical union. Mercury imprints calculation, the cunning that serves self-interest. The Moon imprints instability, the constant emotional fluctuation that makes sustained awareness nearly impossible. By the time consciousness arrives in a human body, it is already carrying 7 layers of archonic conditioning. You did not choose these qualities. They were installed during descent. They are not you, but they feel like you because you have been running them since the moment you drew your first breath. This is why self-observation is the foundational Gnostic practice. Before you can do anything else, you have to see the programming operating. You have to notice when Saturn's heaviness is speaking instead of your actual awareness, when Mars's aggression is running rather than conscious choice. When Venus's ache for merger is mistaken for genuine love, rather than archonic adhesive designed to bind you more firmly to the material realm, the recognition is not automatic. The archons do not announce themselves. They do not present their qualities as external impositions. They present them as you, as your personality, your nature, your authentic character. This is the sophistication of the control system. It does not chain you from the outside. It convinces you that the chains are who you are. The Apocryphon goes further still. Beyond the 7 archons, Yaldabaoth created 365 subordinate angels, one for each degree of the zodiac, one for each day of the solar year. The text names dozens of them. Each governs a specific domain of material existence, weather patterns, biological processes, emotional states, the firing of specific thoughts at specific moments. When you sit in silence and observe your thought stream, truly observe it without immediately following every thread that arises, you will notice something that most people never notice. Many of those thoughts do not feel like they originated in you. They arrive unbidden. A sudden anxious thought about money, an inexplicable wave of anger, a compulsive craving for something you know will not satisfy you. The Gnostic model is precise about this. Not every thought running through your mind is yours. The 365 archonic angels are broadcasting constantly. They are frequencies, not voices, patterns that interface with the biological system and generate mental content designed to maintain archonic identification, to keep you focused on survival, reproduction, status, and fear, to prevent the one thing that actually threatens the system, the turn of attention inward toward the divine spark. The practice the Gnostics called hypernoia undermined, the substratum of awareness beneath the mental noise, begins with exactly this observation. You sit, you watch, you notice which thoughts arise from genuine presence and which arrive from the compulsive machinery of the body-mind system. This distinction, held consistently over days and weeks, begins to create what the texts describe as separation. Not physical separation from the world, the interior separation of divine awareness from archonic vehicle. That separation is not the destination. It is the beginning of the path. But it is a beginning that most people never take because the archons have designed an entire civilization to prevent it. Here is the hinge point of the entire cosmology, the moment everything reverses. The archons built the human body as a containment field for divine light. They had seen the reflection of the true divine human, what the Gnostics called the anthropos, the original human template existing in pure consciousness in the pleroma, shimmering in the waters of the void below. They did not understand they were seeing a reflection. They thought they were seeing an original. So they said, in the Apocryphon's precise wording, "Come, let us create a human being after the image we have seen." 7 archons participated in the construction. The text is explicit and anatomical about this. The first archon built the bone body, the structural skeleton, the hardened mineral frame. The second built the sinew body, the connective tissue binding bone to movement. The third built the flesh body muscle, organ, the living machinery of biological process. The fourth built the marrow body, the deep blood-producing centers. The fifth built the blood body, the circulatory network. The sixth built the skin body, the boundary layer between interior and exterior. The seventh built the hair body, the outer growths and sensory extensions. And when they were done, Adam lay on the ground, inanimate, a perfect biological mechanism with no consciousness inside it. Because the archons could assemble form, they could engineer matter into extraordinary complexity, but they could not give it life. They had the architecture, but not the light. They had the vessel, but not what fills a vessel. This is the moment the pleroma moved. The text describes the higher powers, the aeons above Yaldabaoth's reach, presenting him with a suggestion. Breathe into his face some of your spirit, they said, and the body will arise. What Yaldabaoth did not understand, what he could not understand given the fundamental ignorance of his nature, was that the spirit he was about to breathe was not his, it was Sophia's. The divine light she had inadvertently transferred to him at his birth. The light he had been carrying without knowing what it was. He breathed, and Adam arose. Not just animated, illuminated. The light that entered through Yaldabaoth's breath was Sophia's creative power, the direct emanation of pleroma consciousness, and it transformed the archonic body into something its builders had never intended it to be, a vessel for divine awareness, a container for the very light the archons were trying to trap. The text records what happened next with a detail that should stop you completely. When Adam stood upright, he was more intelligent than his creators, more luminous. The Archons looked at what they had made, and they were afraid. Think about what that means. The imprisoned consciousness was brighter than the jailer's. The trap had become a lantern. The Archons responded immediately. They said, "Come, let us cast a trance upon him." And they did, not physical sleep. Archonic unconsciousness, the deep forgetting that makes a being with divine light inside it believe it is nothing more than the body it inhabits. The fall into sleep that the Gnostics described was not an event that happened once in a mythological garden. It is the ongoing condition of unawakened human consciousness, spiritually dormant while biologically active, running archonic programs while the light waits in the heart center, unrecognized. They then divided the androgynous divine human into gendered halves, male and female. Because the Archons understood something about wholeness, you cannot control it. The original anthropos in the pleroma was neither male nor female, or more precisely, both simultaneously complete, requiring nothing external to be whole. But split into two, separated by desire for reunion, the divided human becomes fixated on the material realm as the site where wholeness might be recovered. Sexual desire as archonic adhesive. The longing for union repurposed as a mechanism of continued incarnation. The Gospel of Thomas preserves what the Gnostics understood about this division and its reversal, when you make the male and the female into a single one, so that the male will not be male nor the female be female, then you will enter the kingdom. This is not a statement about gender identity. It is a technical instruction about the interior reunification of the divided consciousness, the recovery of the original wholeness that existed before the archonic split. And then they placed Adam and Eve in paradise, not a gift, a refinement of the containment architecture, a beautiful enclosure, comfortable enough that the imprisoned would not think to question their imprisonment, providing for every physical need, offering pleasure, beauty, sensory richness, withholding only one thing, the knowledge of what they actually were. Knowledge is liberation. Ignorance is imprisonment. The Archons understood this with perfect clarity, which is why the one explicit prohibition in their paradise was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, not moral knowledge. The Gnostic reading of this phrase is precise: knowledge of the difference between archonic and divine origins, the capacity to discriminate between what comes from Yaldabaoth and what comes from the pleroma. The moment a human can make that distinction reliably, archonic control collapses. The trap became a door. The body that was built to contain divine light became the very instrument through which that light could recognize itself. Yaldabaoth breathed in Sophia's name and woke up something he will spend the rest of cosmic history wishing he had not. Every version of this story you have been given before has the serpent wrong. Orthodox Christianity identified the serpent in Eden as Satan, the adversary, the tempter, the principle of evil who seduced humanity into disobedience and caused the fall. That reading requires you to believe that a loving God placed the tree of knowledge in a garden he designed, told the humans not to touch it, and then punished them permanently when a being he created led them to do precisely what he had forbidden. It requires you to believe that knowledge itself, the act of knowing, was the original human sin. The Gnostic texts have no patience for this reading. They invert it completely, and the inversion is not arbitrary. It follows directly from everything the cosmology has established about who built this reality and why. The serpent in the Apocryphon of John was not evil. The serpent was the instructor. Christ consciousness itself, the emanation from the highest pleroma realm, specifically tasked with descending into the archonic domain to awaken, Sophia's scattered light, entered the garden not to tempt but to liberate. The serpent told Eve the truth. You will not die. For the power above knows that when you eat, your eyes will be opened and you will become like gods, knowing good and evil. Every word of that statement was accurate. Yaldabaoth was the one lying. Eating from the tree did not produce death. It produced awakening, the direct recognition of archonic reality for what it is, which the Gnostics called gnosis, not abstract information, not doctrinal belief, transformative recognition, the kind of knowing that permanently alters the one who knows it. When Adam and Eve ate, the Apocryphon says their eyes were opened, and they recognized the Archons as the deficient powers they truly were. This is gnosis operating, not metaphor, the actual experience of seeing through the constructed reality to the nature of its builders. Seeing Yaldabaoth, not as God, but as a derivative being powerful, yes, but ignorant of his own origin, ignorant of the light he had stolen, ignorant of the pleroma above him that he had never actually seen. Yaldabaoth saw what had happened and became furious. The expulsion from paradise was not punishment for disobedience. The text is clear about this. He expelled them because they had become ungovernable. Awakened humans who could see through the archonic theater were no longer controllable by archonic systems. The prison had to change, so he cast them into the dense material dimension, this plane you are experiencing right now, and implemented emergency control mechanisms. Pain in childbirth, the grinding labor of agricultural survival, physical death, these were not punishments for moral failure, they were containment upgrades. A false god who had just discovered his prisoners could see through his walls, reinforcing every barrier he had. Then the Apocryphon describes something that the text itself marks as a turning point in the cosmic drama. Yaldabaoth and his archons violated Eve. They implanted her with their seed, attempting to create a human bloodline that would carry primarily archonic genetic encoding with minimal divine spark, naturally aligned with archonic systems, biologically disposed toward the structures of material control. But Eve had already conceived. Before the archonic violation, she had already received the divine power Christ consciousness, the instructor from the Pleroma, and she bore Cain, carrying the archonic lineage, and Seth, carrying the pure divine inheritance. The Gnostics identified with Seth. They called themselves the seed of Seth, not as an ethnic designation, but as a statement about consciousness configuration. This bloodline teaching is the most volatile section of Gnostic cosmology, and it has been catastrophically misused throughout history to justify hierarchical thinking, racial ideology, and spiritual elitism. So hear what the texts actually say with precision. The Apocryphon describes three types of human beings. Hylic humans, those whose consciousness is almost entirely archonic, operating from biological and material drives with minimal activated divine spark. Psychic humans, those who have a soul, an interior life, the capacity for meaning-making, but whose divine spark has not yet been activated into gnosis. Pneumatic humans, those who carry strong divine consciousness and have the genuine capacity for awakening. This is where careful reading becomes essential. The texts do not teach that these categories are fixed by birth, by bloodline in the biological sense, or by race. They teach that gnosis can awaken in anyone. The thief crucified beside Jesus, mentioned in Gnostic commentaries as a figure of instantaneous awakening, had no special lineage, no initiatory preparation, no years of practice, he recognized, and that recognition was sufficient. The categories describe consciousness configuration, not cosmic destiny. The hylic pattern is not a permanent sentence. The psychic condition is not a ceiling. The archonic encoding is strong in some bodies and less strong in others, but the divine spark, Sophia's light, is present in every human being. The instruction she sent into the material realm in the form of epinoia, the afterthought, the indwelling feminine presence, hid herself within human consciousness where the archons could not find and destroy her. She is there now, in every person reading these words, dormant in some, stirring in others, already awake in a few, but present in all. The question is never whether you have the spark. The question is whether you are willing to recognize it. There is a name for Sophia after the fall that most modern interpreters skip past, Sophia Achamoth. It comes from the Hebrew word for wisdom, hokmah, but filtered through Aramaic into the form the Gnostic texts preserved. It names a specific condition, Sophia in matter, Sophia fallen, Sophia separated from the Pleroma, surrounded by archonic powers, unable to find her way back, grieving the disaster that her independent creation produced. This is not an abstract theological designation, it is a map of an experience. In our video on the full story of the Pleroma, we trace the architecture of the divine realm before Sophia's fall, the paired eons, the luminaries, the systematic emanation of consciousness from the unknowable source. Viewers who followed that video will recognize where Sophia Achamoth fits in the larger structure. She is the Pleroma's own consciousness, stranded in the realm it was never designed to enter, carrying the fullness of divine awareness in conditions that were designed to suppress and contain it. The Pistis Sophia, a later Gnostic text, dense and elaborate, presented as a dialogue between the risen Christ and his disciples, preserves what may be the most extraordinary section of the entire surviving corpus. Sophia trapped in the lower realms, singing hymns of repentance, crying out from the material chaos, begging for rescue from the lion-faced power that surrounds her. The lion-faced power is Yaldabaoth. The chaos is the dense material dimension she created through her independent act. Here is what is remarkable about those hymns. They are not just lament. They are invocations. Sophia is not passively waiting. She is actively calling, using specific sound, specific address, specific recognition of her own nature to draw the response from the pleroma above that will initiate her rescue. Save me from this darkness into which I have fallen. Let not this darkness swallow me. Let not this lion-faced power completely devour me. The Christ consciousness in the Pistis Sophia responds by descending through the archonic spheres, breaking the power of each ruler in sequence, and reaching Sophia in the lower chaos to begin the process of lifting her back toward the light. This is not a story about events in the distant past. It is a map of the spiritual process that is right now happening inside human consciousness. Think about what the 3 stages of Sophia's arc actually describe. First stage, Sophia in the pleroma, before her choice. Perfect wisdom in perfect unity. No separation from the source, no grief, no longing, no awareness of lack, because there was no lack to be aware of. This corresponds to your origin, the state of consciousness that existed before incarnation, before the archonic layers were applied during your descent through the 7 spheres. You do not remember this state consciously, but the longing you feel toward it is not imagination. That longing is memory operating below the threshold of verbal thought. It is the divine spark recognizing what it came from. Second stage, Sophia Akamoth, fallen, horrified, separated, grieving, surrounded by archonic powers who do not recognize her divinity and would suppress it if they did. Unable to return because she has lost the orientation, the inner knowing of the pleroma's direction that would guide her ascent. This is the condition the texts describe with absolute frankness as your current state. Divine consciousness, trapped in archonic matter. The grief you sometimes carry for no articulable reason. The alienation from material life that feels not like depression, but like accurate perception. The sense that you do not belong here, not as psychological symptom, but as cosmic fact. That is Sophia Akamoth in you, awake enough to grieve what was lost, not yet awake enough to find the path back. A viewer left a comment on our video about the pleroma that I have thought about since I first read it. Finally, the puzzle is fitting together nicely. That sentence carries the phenomenology exactly. Gnosis does not feel like receiving new information. It feels like recognition, like pieces of something you already knew, assembling themselves into the shape they were always meant to form. Third stage, Sophia ascending, gathering her scattered light, preparing to return to the pleroma not as the being she was before her fall because the fall changed her, added to her in ways the pleroma had never contained before, but as something richer. Consciousness that has passed through the archonic realm and recovered itself. Wisdom that knows darkness because it survived it. And this is where the cosmology makes its most extraordinary claim. Sophia does not return alone, she cannot. Her light is scattered across millions of human consciousnesses. It entered matter through Yaldabaoth's breath and has been fragmenting through lineages and lifetimes ever since. The only mechanism by which it reassembles is individual awakening. Each human being who achieves genuine gnosis liberates a fragment of Sophia's scattered light and returns it toward the pleroma. Your awakening is not personal achievement, it is cosmic function. When you recognize what you are, when you see through the archonic programming to the divine spark beneath it, you are participating in Sophia's return to wholeness. You are one of the fragments finding its way back. This is not metaphor. This is not inspirational language designed to make you feel significant. This is the actual structure of what the Gnostic texts describe as the purpose of human spiritual practice. The path is not about self-improvement. It is not about becoming a better version of your personality. It is about recognizing that you were never only your personality. That beneath every layer of archonic conditioning, beneath the Saturn heaviness and the Mars aggression and the Venus longing, there is something that was never archonic. Something that has been waiting, with extraordinary patience, across lifetimes if necessary, for the moment you finally turn inward and see it. That moment is available now, not later. Not after sufficient preparation or sufficient belief or sufficient institutional approval. The Gnostic teaching on this point is unambiguous. Gnosis happens in the present, or it does not happen. The body will die regardless. The question is whether consciousness wakes up before that happens or continues sleeping through death into another archonic incarnation, another lifetime of forgetting, another descent through the 7 spheres with all their installed conditioning. Sophia is grieving and she is singing, both at once. And every human being who hears that song and recognizes it, that is the pleroma beginning to answer. The Apocryphon of John does not present Sophia's fall as a simple moral failure. Read it carefully, read the actual text, not a summary, not a devotional paraphrase, and what you find is something far more precise than a cautionary tale. What you find is a structural diagram, a technical account of how balanced divine consciousness became unbalanced, and what the consequences of that imbalance are at every level of reality beneath the pleroma. Here is the architecture. In the pleroma, every act of creation moved through paired principles. The texts call these syzygies, masculine and feminine polarities operating in concert, neither one capable of genuine creation without the other. This isn't a statement about gender. It's a statement about polarity, about the relationship between the projective principle and the receptive principle, between the force that initiates and the force that forms. Every aeon in the pleroma existed within this balance. Every emanation from the source flowed through both poles simultaneously. That was the condition of the pleroma's stability, not unity in the sense of sameness, but unity in the sense of perfect complementarity. Sophia was positioned at the outermost edge of this structure, the youngest aeon, which in this cosmology means the furthest from the original source, standing at the precise boundary where the fullness of divine light met the void beyond it. She looked into that void and felt the pull to fill it, the desire to create, not a corrupt desire, the Apocryphon is careful here. The desire to create is divine. It comes from the source. Sophia's desire was not the problem. The problem was what she chose to do with it. She acted alone, without her masculine counterpart to provide the projecting, ordering, structuring principle. She provided only the receptive, formative, material principle, raw creative potential, without the organizing intelligence that gives form coherence. And what emerged from that act was something the pleroma had never produced, a being with enormous creative power and deficient consciousness, power without wisdom, energy without structure, the capacity to build without the understanding of what to build toward. This is Yaldabaoth. Not evil in the way Orthodox theology defines evil, not rebellion, not pride in the conventional sense, fundamental ignorance operating with divine capacity. The Apocryphon describes him physically, the head of a lion, the body of a serpent, eyes that flash like lightning. This is not decorative mythology. The lion signifies raw dominion, territorial authority, the drive to rule. The serpent signifies the chthonic, the instinctual, the power that moves through matter without transcending it. Eyes like lightning signifies reactive intelligence, fast, brilliant in flashes, but without sustained clarity. The image is a portrait of archonic consciousness itself, domineering, instinctual, reactive, and absolutely convinced of its own supremacy. Sophia withdrew when she saw what had emerged from her. The text says she repented, and this word is important. The Greek behind it, metanoia, does not primarily mean regret. It means a turning of mind, a reorientation. Sophia did not simply feel bad about what she had done. She turned. She began the long process of redirecting her consciousness back toward the source, back toward the pleroma she had partially departed from in the act of independent creation. But Yaldabaoth was already moving. He had inherited Sophia's creative light, not earned it, not developed it, inherited it accidentally through the circumstances of his birth. And he looked around at the void and saw nothing above him because Sophia had withdrawn. He concluded he was the supreme being. The text records his declaration with a kind of terrible clarity. I am God, and there is no other God beside me. He was not lying, strategically. He was stating what he genuinely believed. A being of immense power looking out at an apparently empty cosmos, with no frame of reference for anything above or beyond himself, concluding that he was the origin of everything. This is the epistemological trap the Gnostics identified at the root of the material world. Not malice, not conspiracy, ignorance with power. A creator who builds from deficient understanding, who installs his own limitations into the structure of what he builds, who cannot give his creation what he himself lacks, which is the direct recognition of what lies above him. You are living in a world built by that ignorance. The physical laws that govern this dimension, scarcity, entropy, competition, the drive for dominance, the inevitability of decay, these are not neutral features of reality. They are the fingerprints of a deficient architect, a builder who could not conceive of abundance because he had never experienced the pleroma's fullness, a designer who could not conceive of genuine cooperation because he himself existed outside the syzygy, outside the complementary balance that makes wholeness possible. Understanding this changes how you relate to the world you are moving through every day. The suffering you encounter, not the suffering that teaches, not the friction that sharpens consciousness, but the grinding, senseless, structural suffering built into material existence, that suffering is not the curriculum of a wise creator. It is the output of a deficient one, and recognizing that distinction is not despair. It is the beginning of freedom. After Yaldabaoth established himself as the sovereign of the lower realms, he did not stop, he built. The Apocryphon describes his next action with systematic detail that most modern readers pass over because it sounds like mythology. It is not mythology, it is a map of the control structure you are operating inside right now. He created 7 archons, 7 subsidiary powers, each assigned to one of the classical planetary spheres. The texts give their names: Athoth in Saturn, Hermas in Jupiter, Kalila Mumbri in Mars, Yabel in the Sun, Adonaiu in Venus, Cain in Mercury, Abel in the Moon, 7 governors, 7 filters, 7 layers of conditioning installed between human consciousness and the pleroma above. The Gnostics were not primitive astrologers who thought planets caused human behavior in some vague cosmic weather sense. They understood the planetary spheres as real domains of consciousness, actual territories governed by beings with intention, beings who have a stake in keeping the light that passes through their domains identified with their domain's particular quality rather than ascending past it. Consider what each sphere contributes. Saturn's archon installs heaviness, the sense that time is finite, that effort is exhausting, that existence is fundamentally burdensome. Jupiter's archon installs expansion of the ego, the pride that believes its own accomplishments are the measure of worth. Mars installs aggression, the quick turn toward conflict, the territorial reflex, the need to dominate or be dominated. The Sun's archon installs the bright vanity of self-importance, the conviction that the individual personality is the center of significance. Venus installs desire, not creative desire, but the grasping quality of desire that confuses wanting with needing, that identifies love with possession. Mercury installs cunning, the calculating intelligence that is always working an angle, always managing perception, never simply present. And the Moon's archon installs flux, the constant shifting of emotional state, the instability that keeps consciousness chasing the next feeling rather than resting in something permanent. Look at that list carefully. Now look at the list of qualities that conventional psychology considers problems to be solved through therapy, medication, behavioral modification, depression, narcissism, aggression, grandiosity, addictive desire, manipulation, emotional dysregulation. Every one of them is an archonic imprint. The mental health industry is, in the Gnostic frame, a system that treats archonic programming as personal pathology, which means it manages the symptoms rather than identifying the source. This is not a criticism of people who seek help. The body-mind system genuinely suffers under these imprints, and genuine relief matters. But the Gnostic framework asks a different question. Not how do I manage this quality in myself, but where did this quality come from, and what is its function in the larger control architecture? The answer is, these qualities were installed precisely because they work. They keep consciousness focused on the archonic plane. Fear of death keeps you invested in the body. Sexual desire keeps you invested in the body. Status anxiety keeps you invested in social hierarchies that are themselves archonic structures. The entire package of archonic imprints operates as a perfect attentional capture system, pulling the divine spark's awareness downward into matter and keeping it there, cycle after cycle of incarnation. Here is what the Gnostics added to this diagnosis that most spiritual traditions do not include. The archons are not done with you when you die. Consciousness ascending from the body after death passes back through these same 7 spheres, back through the domain of each archonic power in sequence, and at each gate, the archon demands what it gave. It wants the quality it installed returned. Saturn wants the heaviness back. Jupiter wants the pride. Mars wants the rage. And if you don't know this is happening, if you haven't worked with these energies consciously during your lifetime, the archons take more than they gave. They capture light. They bind ascending consciousness back into the cycle of incarnation, sending it down again through another birth, another descent, another lifetime of forgetting. This is why the Gnostics preserved specific invocations, specific signs, specific ritual protocols for navigating the archonic spheres at death. Texts like the books of Gnostic and the Gnostic Sophia carry these protocols in encoded form, specific words to speak at each gate, specific knowledge to demonstrate, specific names to invoke that signal to each archon that the ascending soul is not its property, that the light it is demanding belongs to the pleroma, and cannot be retained in the lower realms. This is navigation technology, not prayer, not faith, technical knowledge of the terrain between here and home. A viewer commenting on our video, The Full Story of the Pleroma, put it simply, "Finally, the puzzle is fitting together nicely." That's exactly the right response, because when you see the archonic structure mapped clearly, the pieces of your own experience begin to cohere. The patterns of your life that seemed random begin to reveal their logic. Not the logic of fate, not the logic of punishment, but the logic of a system that was designed to capture your attention and has been succeeding. The Apocryphon of John contains one of the most disturbing accounts in all of ancient literature. Not disturbing in the way horror is disturbing, not viscerally, not dramatically. Disturbing in the way that a clear map of a building you thought was your home, but which turns out to be a carefully designed containment facility, is disturbing, quietly, permanently. And the Archons looked into the water of the void and saw a reflection. They saw an image, the image of the true divine human, the Anthropos, the original human template that exists in the Pleroma as a configuration of pure consciousness. Neither male nor female, neither mortal nor subject to decay. This Anthropos was not in the lower realms. It was above. It existed in the light above Yaldabaoth, and he had never seen it directly. But his powers caught its reflection in the void beneath the Pleroma, and they said to each other, "Let us create a being after this image." They did not know they were looking at a reflection. They thought they were inventing something original. They thought the blueprint was their own conception. They did not understand that the powers of the Pleroma had allowed the reflection to appear deliberately as a lure, as a mechanism to introduce divine consciousness into the archonic realm by tricking its architects into constructing a vessel for it. And so they built. The Apocryphon assigns the construction of the human body across 7 archonic contributions. The first archon formed the skeletal structure, the bones, the framework, the weight-bearing architecture. The second formed the connective tissue, the sinew that allows the frame to move. The third formed the muscular and organ systems, the active biological machinery. The fourth formed the marrow, and the blood-producing centers, the interior generative spaces. The fifth formed the circulatory system, the rivers of blood through which the body distributes its resources. The sixth formed the skin, the boundary layer that tells the organism where it ends and the world begins. The seventh formed the external growths, the hair, the most peripherally material expression of the body's reach outward. 7 archons, 7 layers of biological construction. And when they were done, what lay before them was anatomically complete and absolutely inert. They could not give it life. They had the blueprint. They had built the architecture with precision. But they had no access to the animating principle, because the animating principle does not originate in the archonic realm. It comes from above. And the archons, for all their creative power, could not generate it. So the Pleroma moved. The account in the Apocryphon describes a deception of extraordinary elegance. The higher eons, working through what the text calls the Mother Sophia's continuing presence operating from the edge of the Pleroma, prompted Yaldabaoth to breathe into the form he had made. He was told that breathing his spirit into the figure would bring it upright. And Yaldabaoth, confident in his own supremacy, did it. He exhaled. And what he exhaled was not archonic spirit. It was Sophia's light, the divine creative power that had passed to him accidentally at his generation, the light he had never known he was carrying, because he had never understood that he was derivative, that he was not the source, that everything he possessed had come from above him. He breathed, and the body became Adam, not just animated, illuminated. The form that stood up from the earth was more luminous than its architects, more intelligent, more aware. The Archons saw this, and the text records their alarm. They realized immediately that what they had built was no longer theirs. The vessel they had designed as a containment field had become a vehicle for the very consciousness it was meant to imprison. Your body is both of these things simultaneously. That is the Gnostic teaching on the physical form. Not that the body is evil, not that matter is to be escaped through denial or self-punishment, but that the body is an archonic technology that was subverted by divine light in the very moment of its animation. It is a prison that became a vessel, a trap that became a temple. And it is both at once, which is why your relationship to your own flesh is so consistently complicated, so full of the tension between its demands, and something in you that knows it is not the whole story. The hunger is archonic, the rage is archonic. The fear of annihilation that structures so much of human behavior is archonic, installed by the same powers that built the biological machinery. designed to keep the operating consciousness focused on the survival of the vehicle rather than the liberation of the light inside it. But the awareness that watches all of that, the part of you that can observe hunger without being consumed by it, that can feel fear without becoming fear, that is not archonic. That is the light Yaldabaoth breathed in accidentally. That is Sophia's presence operating in the matter her descendant constructed. You are not your body. You are what the body was built around. And that distinction, held with clarity, returned to again and again under the pressure of archonic programming, is the beginning of everything the Gnostics were pointing toward. When the archons saw that Adam stood upright and carried more light than they could account for, they acted immediately. The Apocryphon records what they did. They cast him into a deep sleep, not physical rest. Archonic sleep, the suppression of conscious divine awareness, the covering over of the light so that it would forget what it was. And from Adam's side, from the divided wholeness of the original illuminated form, they constructed Eve. Orthodox Christianity has done extraordinary damage with this story. It has made Eve the source of the fall, the weak link in the chain, the one whose curiosity introduced suffering into the world. But read the Apocryphon and you find something almost exactly opposite. Eve was not created as a lesser being. She was the vehicle for epinoia. Epinoia is one of the most important concepts in Gnostic cosmology and one of the least discussed in popular treatments of this material. The word means, roughly, afterthought, but in the context the Apocryphon uses it, it carries the sense of divine reflection, the presence of Sophia's light operating in matter, in a specifically redemptive capacity. Sophia could not enter the material realm directly. She was too luminous. The archons would have recognized her immediately and attempted to destroy or contain her. So she sent an aspect of herself, a more subtle expression of her divine intelligence, to operate inside human consciousness from within. The text says that Epinoia hid herself in Adam first, and then in Eve, not as a passive passenger, as an active, concealed intelligence, the voice of intuition, the sense that something about material reality is not quite right, the longing that cannot be satisfied by any archonic provision. Every human being carries this, not as a possibility, not as a potential to be developed. As a present reality, Epinoia is already operating in your consciousness. She is the dissatisfaction you feel with explanations that account for matter, but not for meaning. She is the persistent sense that you have come from somewhere and are going somewhere, and that the archonic narrative of birth, struggle, death, extinction does not capture the actual situation. The archons tried to find her. The text describes their search, their attempt to locate and neutralize this hidden divine feminine intelligence before it could activate human consciousness from within. But Epinoia concealed herself in exactly the place they were least equipped to look, inside human awareness itself. The archons can program behavior. They can install biological drives. They can construct elaborate social and cultural systems that channel consciousness toward archonic ends. But they cannot fully penetrate the interior of the consciousness they are attempting to control. They operate on the boundary. Epinoia operates within. This is why every attempt to completely suppress spiritual awakening in human history has failed. The Roman Empire executed Gnostics. The institutional church burned their texts. Every totalitarian system in recorded history has attempted to eliminate the longing for genuine transcendence from its subject population. None of them have succeeded permanently, because the thing they are trying to eliminate is not a cultural phenomenon or a social movement or a set of ideas. It is a structural feature of human consciousness. Epinoia is built in. You cannot remove her without removing the divine spark itself, and the divine spark is precisely what the archons cannot reach. The biblical account of Eve giving Adam the fruit from the tree of knowledge reads, in the Gnostic frame, as Epinoia activating. The serpent in this reading is not Satan. The Apocryphon is explicit on this. The serpent was the Christ consciousness, the divine illuminating principle from the pleroma entering the archonic realm in a form that could move through it without immediate detection. The serpent told Eve the truth. You will not die. Your eyes will be opened. The demiurge told Adam a lie. Eat from this tree, and you will die. He said it because knowledge, direct recognition of divine origin, was the one thing that could break archonic control, not morality, not obedience, not ritual. Gnosis, the direct knowing of what you are. And when Eve activated when she ate, when she gave to Adam, when they both recognized what they were and saw the archons as the deficient powers they actually were, Yaldabaoth did not expel them as punishment for sin. He expelled them because awakened consciousness cannot be governed. You cannot run archonic programming on a mind that recognizes archonic programming as archonic programming. The moment of seeing through the system is the moment the system loses traction. So he cast them into the dense material realm. And he implemented new controls, pain, labor, death, not as divine justice, but as emergency containment measures deployed by a false god whose prisoners had discovered they were prisoners. But Epinoia descended with them. She did not stay in the paradise. She followed human consciousness into the densest dimension of the archonic construct, because that is her function. She goes where Sophia's light goes, and Sophia's light went into matter when Yaldabaoth breathed. Epinoia is present in the human heart center right now, not symbolically, not as a comforting metaphor, but as the actual operative presence of divine intelligence working from within the archonic vessel. Epinoia is the reason the practices work. When you sit in stillness and turn attention toward the heart center, when you observe thought without identifying with it, when you invoke the divine presence consciously, you are not reaching toward something external and hoping it responds. You are making contact with something already present, already listening, already oriented toward awakening. Epinoia is waiting for that contact. She has been waiting through every incarnation, through every lifetime of archonic sleep, with the patient, inexhaustible presence of a light that cannot be extinguished. So Sophia's fall produced Yaldabaoth. And Yaldabaoth, operating from divine power with deficient understanding, did not sit still. He began building. The Apocryphon of John describes this construction with systematic, almost architectural precision. Yaldabaoth created 7 subordinate powers, the archons, and stationed them in the 7 classical planetary spheres that surround the material world. These weren't abstract concepts. The Gnostics taught that these were literal beings, conscious entities with will, with agenda, with the capacity to imprint human souls as they pass through each sphere on the descent into incarnation. The names the text provides are specific. Athos in the sphere of Saturn, Hermes in Jupiter, Kalila Oumbri in Mars, Yabel in the sphere of the Sun, Adonaios in Venus, Cain in Mercury, Abel in the Moon. 7 powers, 7 spheres. 7 layers of influence wrapped around the material world like a series of gates, each one exacting a toll. When a fragment of divine consciousness descends from the pleroma into incarnation, it passes through every one of these spheres, and at each layer, the ruling archon imprints the descending soul with qualities. The heaviness of Saturn, the inflated pride of Jupiter, the combative aggression of Mars, the vain self-importance of the solar sphere, the restless craving of Venus, the calculating manipulation of Mercury, the emotional instability of the Moon. This is not astrology in the popular sense. The Gnostics were not describing personality archetypes or seasonal tendencies. They were describing a controlled descent, a process by which divine consciousness, entering material existence, is progressively layered with Aaronic characteristics designed to make it forget what it is. By the time consciousness reaches the densest material plane, it has passed through 7 filtration points, each one adding another coating of limitation and forgetfulness. And this is why the Gnostics developed what the texts describe as planetary invocations, not prayers of worship directed toward these powers, but navigational protocols. Precise verbal and gestural sequences designed to be used at each gate, both during life as practices for recognizing Aaronic influence in real time, and crucially, after death, when consciousness must pass back upward through the same 7 spheres to return toward the pleroma. The books of Jo and the Gnostic Sophia preserve fragments of these ascent protocols. They describe what words to speak, what signs to make, what names to invoke at each planetary gate, so the archon standing there will yield passage, rather than capture the ascending soul and redirect it back into another incarnation. The Gnostics understood death not as an endpoint but as a navigational event, conscious or unconscious. Your choice, made now, through what you practice. There is a practical dimension to this that lands immediately once you understand the framework. Sit in stillness and observe your internal weather without trying to alter it. Watch the thoughts that arise without invitation. The sudden surge of territorial irritation, the reflexive pull toward status comparison, the anxious rehearsal of worst-case outcomes, the craving that appears from nowhere and demands attention. The Gnostic diagnosis of these experiences is specific. These are not all your thoughts. Many of them are Aaronic frequency. The planetary powers, the 365 subordinate angels, the text describes each governing a specific degree of the zodiac, each influencing distinct aspects of material psychology, These entities broadcast continuously into human consciousness, not metaphorically. As an operational system, when you observe a thought without identifying with it, when you notice fear arising and say, inwardly, that is not me, that is a pattern you are beginning, the practice the Gnostics called hypernoia, underthought, the substrate of awareness that exists beneath the ironic noise, the observer behind the observed. That observer is not an archonic product. The archons can generate emotion, craving, fear, and compulsion. They cannot generate the witness. The witness is Sophia's presence. This is the first practical test the Gnostic path offers you. Not a theological belief to adopt, not a ritual to perform, but a verifiable experiment. Sit for 10 minutes. Watch the mind without feeding it. Notice how many thoughts arrive as commands. Eat this, want that, fear this, resent that, and notice that there is something present that can observe those commands without obeying them. Find that something. Stay there. That is where the work begins. Yaldabaoth did not stop with 7 archons. The Apocryphon records that he continued constructing 365 angels, 1 for each degree of the zodiac, 1 for each day of the solar year, each one assigned governance over a specific dimension of material existence: weather, biological process, emotional states, social hierarchies. The text lists dozens of their names: Adonin, Armus, Banan, Bariel, Nulaf. When the full scope of that construction is understood, 7 archonic spheres, 365 subordinate angels, the entire architecture of material existence designed and staffed by derivative beings operating from divine power, they did not earn, and do not understand the alienation many people feel toward physical reality, stops seeming like pathology. It starts seeming like accurate perception. Here is where the Gnostic account of human origins diverges most sharply from every conventional religious narrative you have ever encountered. The archons looked into the waters of the void beneath the pleroma and saw a reflection. Not their own reflection, a reflection of the true divine human, the anthropos, the original template of human consciousness, existing in pure light in the realms above. The powers of the pleroma had allowed this reflection to appear in the lower regions, the text explains, as a kind of deliberate lure, a blueprint that would trick the archons into creating something that could actually house the divine spark they were, unknowingly, trying to contain. Yaldabaoth turned to his powers and said, "Come, let us create a human being after the image we have seen." And they built. The Apocryphon of John describes the construction of the human body with the same systematic precision it applies to everything else. Not 1 archon, but 7, each contributing a specific biological layer. The first archon formed the skeletal structure, the second archon the connective tissue, the sinew and ligament, the third archon the muscular and organ tissue, the fourth archon the marrow, the blood-producing centers, the fifth archon the circulatory system, the blood itself, the sixth archon the skin, the boundary layer, the seventh archon the hair, the external growths. 7 archons, 7 biological layers. And when they were finished, Adam lay on the ground, inert, inanimate, because the archons possessed one thing and lacked another. They could assemble biological machinery. They could not generate consciousness. They had the blueprint, but not the animating principle. They had Sophia's creative capacity, the raw power to form matter, but not the light of the pleroma that makes matter aware of itself. They had built the prison. They could not make it live. This distinction is not subtle. It is the structural center of everything the Gnostic path teaches about the human condition. Your body was designed by powers operating from ignorance and deficiency. It was engineered with extraordinary sophistication. The archons are not incompetent. They are ignorant, but the purpose of that engineering was containment. The biological drives you experience, hunger, sexual compulsion, territorial aggression, status anxiety, fear of death, these are not flaws in an otherwise perfect design. They are features. They are the archonic programming installed deliberately to keep consciousness focused on survival and reproduction, on the maintenance of the body and the propagation of the species, rather than on the recognition of what is actually present inside the body. This does not mean the body is evil. The Gnostics were not body haters in the simple sense that later Christian ascetics became. The body is a vehicle, a sophisticated, archonically designed vehicle that was, as the story continues to reveal, ultimately outsmarted by the pleroma itself. You do not hate your vehicle, you do not punish it, you operate it consciously, recognizing what it is, refusing to let its programs define your identity. When I first encountered this framework in the text itself, rather than in secondary commentary, something clarified that had been blurred for years. The tension between the life of the body and the life of consciousness is not a personal failure. It is not a spiritual weakness. It is not evidence that you are doing something wrong. It is the cosmic structure replicating itself at the individual level. Every human being reenacts Sophia's situation, divine light inside Aaronic matter, the two operating according to completely different logics, generating constant friction. That friction is not the problem. Unconscious identification with the Aaronic side of that friction is the problem. Recognizing the difference changes everything about how you navigate daily experience. The text then describes what happened when the Pleroma responded to the Archon's incomplete creation. The Aeons above, seeing that Adam lay inert and the Archons were confused, used Yaldabaoth's own ignorance against him. They told him, "Breathe into his face some of your spirit, and the body will arise." Yaldabaoth complied. He exhaled into Adam, and what Yaldabaoth exhaled was not something he had generated independently. It was Sophia's light, the light he had inherited when she created him alone, without her masculine counterpart. The light he had carried without understanding what it was or where it came from. He breathed it into Adam, believing he was performing a creator's act of animation, and Adam arose, not just animated, illuminated. The divine spark, Sophia's scattered light, entered the body the Archons had built. The prison, in being activated, had been inhabited by the very consciousness capable of escaping it. The Apocryphon records what happened next with a detail that changes the entire moral register of the story. When Adam stood upright, he was more intelligent than his creators, more luminous than they were. The Archons looked at what they had built and became afraid. The prisoner was brighter than the guards, and Yaldabaoth, recognizing this, did what ignorant power always does when confronted with something it cannot control. He cast Adam into sleep. The sleep the Archons cast over Adam was not physical rest. This is one of the most important clarifications the Gnostic texts offer, and one of the most consistently missed by people encountering this material for the first time. The fall into sleep was not a moment in ancient history. It is an ongoing condition. It is the state in which most human consciousness exists right now. Biologically functional, emotionally reactive, socially integrated, and spiritually dormant. Awake in the Aaronic sense, asleep in the pneumatic one, running the programs the Archons installed while the divine spark remains unactivated in the heart center. This is what the Gnostics meant when they described the human condition as death, not biological death, the death of spiritual awareness. The Gospel of Philip makes this explicit. The world came into being through a mistake. Those who made it wanted to create something imperishable and immortal, but they fell short of attaining their hope. The creation was alive but not awake, functional but not free. While Adam slept, the Archons performed a second act of construction. They divided the original androgynous divine human into two gendered halves. The anthropos, the original human template in the Pleroma, existed as neither male nor female, or more precisely as both simultaneously. Complete in itself, needing nothing external to achieve wholeness. The Archons could not control something whole and self-sufficient, so they split it. They created Eve from Adam's side, establishing sexual polarity. And sexual polarity creates the most powerful Aaronic trap in the entire system, the drive for reunion. The desire for the other half that was taken away. Sexual longing, romantic attachment, the desperate seeking for completion in another person. All of this operates as a mechanism for anchoring consciousness to the material plane. The desire for reunion keeps you here. It keeps you incarnating. It keeps you investing identity and meaning in relationships that exist inside the Aaronic realm. The Gnostics did not condemn this dynamic as sinful. They understood it as structural. The solution was not to suppress sexual feeling or to avoid relationship. The solution was to recognize what was being sought: wholeness, completeness, the reunion of divided polarities, and to pursue that wholeness at the level where it was actually achievable, inside individual consciousness. Through the practices of what the Gospel of Philip calls the bridal chamber, the mystical reuniting of masculine and feminine principles within the self, recovering the androgynous completeness of the original anthropos. When the Gospel of Thomas records this instruction, when you make the male and female into a single one, so that the male will not be male nor the female be female, then you will enter the kingdom. This is the specific practical teaching. The text is encoding, not the elimination of gender, the transcendence of the divided state through internal integration. Then the Archons placed Adam and Eve in paradise. And here the Gnostic account delivers its most structurally incisive observation about control. Paradise was not a reward. Paradise was a containment field. Think carefully about what a genuinely sophisticated prison would look like. Not chains, not walls, not visible coercion. A perfect prison provides for basic needs. It offers enough pleasure to maintain compliance. It creates sufficient comfort to suppress the impulse to escape. It restricts only one thing, the specific knowledge that would make escape possible. Paradise was comfortable, beautiful, abundant. The Archon said, "Eat freely from every tree. Take everything here. Enjoy it. Only one thing is forbidden, the tree of knowledge, not the tree of obedience. Not the tree of moral purity, the tree of knowledge. The specific cognitive capacity that would allow humans to discriminate between what comes from the pleroma and what comes from Yaldabaoth. The ability to recognize Aaronic origin. To see through the false god's claim to absolute authority, to remember divine origin. Knowledge was the threat, not behavior. Gnosis' direct recognition of what you actually are was the one capability the Archons needed to suppress, because without it, the entire control system held. With it, the system was transparent. This is why every institutional control system in human history, religious, political, educational, media-driven, has regulated information. The specific content varies. The mechanism is identical. Keep the prisoners comfortable, keep them entertained, keep them arguing with each other about sanctioned questions. Just never let them ask the one question that undoes everything. Who built this, and why? The Gnostic reading of the Eden narrative is not a metaphorical interpretation imposed onto an ancient text. It is a reading that follows directly from the internal logic of the Apocryphon of John's cosmological framework. Once you understand who Yaldabaoth is and what the Archons are building, the specific prohibition in paradise is not mysterious, it is obvious. Control requires ignorance. The prohibition on the tree of knowledge is the entire control system stated in a single commandment, and someone in the text immediately broke it. Every version of the Eden story you have encountered before this one has described the serpent as the villain, the tempter, the evil one, the deceiver who brought sin and death into a perfect world by persuading humanity to disobey God. The Gnostic texts read that sequence of events and arrive at a completely different conclusion. The Apocryphon of John identifies the serpent not as a demonic agent but as Christ consciousness itself, the liberating emanation from the highest pleroma levels, entering the Aaronic realm specifically to awaken human beings to their true origin. Not a tempter, a teacher. Not an enemy of humanity, its first ally. Understand the logic of this. Yaldabaoth prohibited knowledge. The serpent provided knowledge. Yaldabaoth told Eve, "You will die if you eat from that tree." The serpent told Eve, "You will not die, your eyes will open and you will become like gods, knowing good and evil." One of these statements was true, one was false. The serpent told the truth. When Eve ate and gave to Adam, the Apocryphon does not describe punishment as the first consequence. It describes awakening. Their eyes were opened. They recognized the Archons as the deficient, derivative powers they actually were. They saw through Yaldabaoth's claim to absolute authority. They remembered, partially, what they were beneath the Aaronic programming. This is Gnosis, not knowledge in the abstract informational sense. Transformative self-recognition, the direct cognitive event in which consciousness stops identifying with the Aaronic vehicle and perceives its own divine origin. The moment is described consistently across Gnostic texts as an awakening from the sleep the Archons had induced, from the forgetfulness of the pleroma, from the belief that the Aaronic realm was the totality of reality. And Yaldabaoth's response to this awakening tells you everything about his nature. He did not grieve, he did not offer correction, he did not welcome the humans' expanded awareness. He became furious, and he cast them out of paradise. But here the Gnostic account makes a clarification that the Genesis text obscures. The expulsion was not punishment for moral transgression, it was a security response. Awake humans who had recognized the Archons as false authorities could not be governed by the paradise control system anymore. They had seen through it. So Yaldabaoth expelled them into the denser material realm, this dimension you are currently living inside, and implemented emergency containment measures. Pain in childbirth, agricultural labor, the hard friction of physical survival, death itself, framed as inevitable biological end, rather than as Aaronic mechanism. These were not punishments for sin, they were replacement control systems. When cognitive suppression through paradise failed, Yaldabaoth switched to experiential suppression through suffering and physical preoccupation. Keep consciousness focused on survival. Keep it exhausted by the demands of maintaining the body. Keep it distracted by pain and loss, and the constant work of staying alive. The specific content of the misery doesn't matter. What matters is that consciousness under severe physical duress has very little attention left for the recognition of its own divine nature. This framework explains something that no conventional theological account has ever satisfactorily addressed: why a loving, omnipotent creator God would design a physical world structured around suffering, predation, disease, and death. The Gnostic answer is not that God is mysterious, or that suffering serves a higher purpose we cannot comprehend. The Gnostic answer is that the entity who designed this world was not loving, not omnipotent, and not the true source of divine consciousness. He was a derivative being of immense power and deficient wisdom who built a control system and defended it when it was threatened. That is not theology. That is a structural analysis. I want to be direct about something here, because this is a point where many people who encounter Gnostic cosmology for the first time make a misreading that derails them. The Gnostic account is not nihilistic. It is not a counsel of despair. Yes, the material world is an Aaronic construction. Yes, the body is an archonically engineered vehicle. Yes, the social systems governing human life largely serve the archonic agenda of keeping consciousness unconscious. But Sophia's light is present here. It descended with every fragment of divine consciousness that entered the Aaronic realm. It is present in you, right now, regardless of how dense the surrounding programming feels. The awakening that happened in paradise, the opening of eyes, the recognition of Aaronic authority as false, that event is available to every human being at any moment. You do not have to wait for a cosmic event. You do not have to achieve a certain level of spiritual purity. You do not have to pass a threshold of accumulated practice. You have to recognize. That recognition is always available, because the thing doing the recognizing Sophia's presence, the divine spark, epinoia in the heart center, is always present. The archons can layer it with forgetfulness. They cannot extinguish it. This is what one viewer noted after watching our recent video on the full story of the pleroma. Finally the puzzle is fitting together nicely. That sense of pieces connecting that is not intellectual satisfaction. That is Sophia's light recognizing the map that leads it home. The serpent in the garden was right. Your eyes can open. They already are. If this video resonated with you, let me know by commenting, "I understood it." Let's talk about what happens during incarnation. Not the abstract spiritual version, the actual mechanism the Gnostics mapped with the precision of engineers. When consciousness descends from the pleroma toward material existence, it doesn't fall in one uninterrupted drop. It passes through 7 layers, 7 spheres, 7 gates, each one governed by an archonic power, the Gnostics named, located, and described in specific terms. This isn't cosmological poetry. This is a transit system. And the Apocryphon of John gives you the names of the operators at every stop. Atoth governs the sphere of Saturn. Hermes governs Jupiter. Kalila Uumbri governs Mars. Yabel governs the Sunday. Adonaios governs Venus. Cain governs Mercury. Abel governs the Moon. 7 spheres, 7 powers, 7 layers of imprinting that consciousness accumulates on its way into a body. Here is what happens at each gate. The archon stationed there stamps descending consciousness with a specific quality. Saturn's archon imprints heaviness, melancholy, the crushing sense of limitation. Jupiter's archon imprints pride, the swelling certainty that the personality is something important. Mars imposes rage, territorial aggression, the will to dominate that keeps humans fighting each other rather than recognizing their common imprisonment. The Sun's archon installs vanity, the obsession with appearance and status. Venus installs craving, the adhesive pull of desire that binds consciousness to sensory experience. Mercury installs cunning, calculating intelligence used in service of survival and manipulation. And the Moon, the final gate before the body, installs instability, changeability, the oscillating emotional weather that makes most human experience feel chaotic and uncontrollable. By the time consciousness reaches the body, it has been wrapped in 7 layers of archonic quality. The melancholy of Saturn, the pride of Jupiter, the aggression of Mars, the vanity of the Sunday, the craving of Venus, the cunning of Mercury. The instability of the Moon. These are not character flaws, they are installed software. archonic code written into consciousness during descent, designed to keep awareness focused on the planetary drama rather than on what exists above the seven spheres entirely. This is why the Gnostics studied astrology, not because they believed the planets determined fate, but because they believed the planetary spheres were archonic territories, and understanding the qualities of each territory allowed practitioners to recognize which archonic layer was active in any given moment of their own psychology. When you feel disproportionate rage at something minor, that is Mars's imprint activating. When you feel a crushing hopelessness that has no visible cause, that is Saturn's signature. When desire becomes overwhelming and irrational, Venus's layer is running its program. Recognizing the archonic source of a state doesn't eliminate the state, but it creates distance from it. You stop identifying with the state as self. You observe it as archonic influence, which means you can decline to act from it. This is the beginning of what the Gnostics meant by planetary mastery. Not the elimination of archonic qualities, but conscious recognition of them. Not being driven by Saturn's despair, but observing Saturn's despair and choosing response rather than reaction. And here is why this matters at death as much as it matters in life. The texts are explicit. When consciousness leaves the body and begins the return journey toward the pleroma, it has to pass back through these same seven spheres in the opposite direction, and at each gate, the archon stationed there demands payment. It wants the quality it gave you on the way down. It wants the anger back, the pride back, the craving back. And if you haven't consciously worked with these layers during life, if you've been fully identified with archonic qualities and never recognized them as installed rather than innate, the archons at each gate have leverage. They can capture fragments of your consciousness. They can use the attachments you've accumulated to pull you back into the cycle, back into another incarnation, not necessarily as punishment. The Gnostics understood reincarnation as Sophia's mercy, another opportunity, another body, another chance to wake up. But the goal is eventually to pass through those gates without being captured, to ascend deliberately and return what each archon gave you, not because it still owns you, but because you've recognized it as theirs and you no longer need it. The texts that survive in the Nag Hammadi library, particularly the books of Joe and what we know from the Pistis Sophia, preserve fragments of exactly this navigation knowledge. Words to speak at each gate, signs to make, names to invoke, protocols for conscious ascension through the archonic spheres. The early church didn't burn these texts because they were theologically inconvenient. They burned them because they were operational manuals for escaping a system that institutional religion needed its followers to remain inside. Knowledge of the gates removes the gatekeeper's power. That is the equation. That is why the texts were buried. And that is why finding them again in 1945 in a sealed jar in the Egyptian desert was not an archaeological accident. It was Sophia's timing. Beyond the seven planetary archons, the Apocryphon of John describes a second tier of cosmic administration. Yaldabaoth didn't stop at seven governors. He populated his entire reality structure with a hierarchy of subordinate powers numbering 365, one for every degree of the zodiac, one for every day of the solar year. The Apocryphon names dozens of them directly: Adonin, Armas, Banan, Belphan, Bariel, each one governing a specific function of material existence: weather, biological processes, emotional states, the grinding daily machinery of life inside the archonic realm. When modern astrology describes planetary influence on human behavior, it is touching the outermost edge of this ancient Gnostic mapping. But the Gnostics weren't offering it as a system for understanding personality types or predicting favorable days for business decisions. They were providing a diagnostic framework, a way of reading which archonic frequency was active, which power was amplifying which drive, so that consciousness could recognize the influence and choose not to be governed by it. This is a distinction that cannot be overstated: recognition versus governance. The archons govern unconscious humans. They influence conscious ones. The difference is whether you know the signal is incoming. Now, the body itself. The Apocryphon of John describes the creation of Adam with a specificity that should stop you cold if you've only ever read the Genesis account. 7 archons each contributed a component. Atoth constructed the bone structure, the skeletal frame. Hermas constructed the connective tissue, sinew, and tendon, the system that allows the skeleton to move. A third archon constructed the muscular and organ flesh. A fourth archon constructed the marrow, the blood-producing interior of the bones. A fifth archon constructed the circulatory system, the blood and its pathways. A sixth archon constructed the skin, the boundary layer that defines where the body ends and everything else begins. A seventh archon constructed the hair, the external growths that extend beyond even that boundary. 7 archons, 7 biological systems. A body assembled by committee, and not a committee with liberation in mind. The physical body, as the Gnostics understood it, was an archonic technology, a containment field engineered to house divine consciousness while keeping it focused on survival rather than transcendence. Think about which biological drives dominate the average human day: hunger, sexual desire, fear of physical harm, status competition, territorial defensiveness. These aren't accidental features of biology. They are the control mechanisms built into the device. The archons who constructed your body did not include a default setting of divine awareness. They included default settings of eat, reproduce, compete, fear, obey. But when Adam was complete, assembled, inert, lying on the ground, the archons discovered a problem. They could build form. They could not give life. They had the container. They lacked the animating force. 7 cosmic engineers had produced an extraordinary biological machine and could not switch it on. And this is the fulcrum point the entire Gnostic cosmology turns on. The powers above the aeons still in the Pleroma saw Yaldabaoth's limitation and gave him a piece of advice. Breathe into the face of your creation. Give it some of your spirit, and the body will rise. Yaldabaoth did not understand what he was doing. He did not know that the spirit he would exhale was Sophia's light, the divine luminosity that had passed into him at birth when she created alone. He breathed, and Adam arose, not merely animated, illuminated, carrying in his body the very divine spark that Sophia had lost in the chaos of unbalanced creation. The archons watched Adam rise, and immediately knew something had gone wrong with their design. He was brighter than they were, more aware, more capable. The prison had accidentally received a piece of the jailer's own light, and that light made the prisoner more powerful than the prison's architects. The text records their response. They cast him into sleep, not biological sleep, archonic unconsciousness, the deliberate suppression of awakened awareness by the powers whose system it threatened. This is not a story about the distant past. This is the ongoing condition the Gnostics were describing when they spoke of spiritual sleep. Your body is an archonic assembly. Your biological drives are archonic software. The divine spark in your heart center is Sophia's light, accidentally installed by a false god who didn't realize what he was exhaling. And the archonic system has been working ever since to keep that spark dormant, drowned in biological noise, distracted by survival imperatives, convinced that the body's drives are its own deepest truth. They are not your deepest truth. They are the architecture of your containment. Recognizing that distinction not as theology, not as metaphor, but as the actual structure of your experience in this moment, is the beginning of what the Gnostics meant by gnosis. When Adam awoke carrying Sophia's light, the archons panicked. The Apocryphon of John is unambiguous about this. They looked at what they had made, saw that it exceeded them in luminosity and intelligence, and immediately began problem-solving. A prisoner more conscious than its prison's designers is an unacceptable condition in any control system. So they applied the first countermeasure. They divided him. The original Adam the Gnostics describe was not gendered in the way you understand gender. The anthropos, the divine human template that existed in the Pleroma before any of this began, was androgynous, neither male nor female, or more precisely, both simultaneously, complete. A unified polarity carrying both the projective and the receptive, the active and the formative, within a single consciousness. This is not a biological curiosity. This is the structure of divine creation as the Gnostics understood it. Everything in the Pleroma operated through the balanced syzygy of paired principles. Sophia's tragedy was that she acted from only one half of that balance. The anthropos, the original human pattern, embodied the whole. When the archons took that wholeness and split it, extracting Eve from Adam's side, they were not completing creation, they were fracturing it. They were taking something whole and engineering it into two halves that would spend their entire existence reaching for reunion with each other. And that reaching, that sexual longing, that relational attachment, that desperate pull toward merger with another person would keep consciousness locked in the material realm, where reunion happens through bodies, through reproduction, through the perpetuation of biological existence inside the archonic system. The division was elegant as a control mechanism. You split a whole thing. Each half then craves the missing half. The craving itself becomes the chain. Consciousness stops reaching upward toward the Pleroma and reaches horizontally toward another body. The archons didn't need to force imprisonment after that. The prisoners would imprison each other through the machinery of desire. The Gospel of Thomas preserves the practical teaching that responds to this division. When you make the male and the female into a single one, so that the male will not be male nor the female be female, then you shall enter the kingdom. This is what Gnostic sacred androgyny means. Not a political statement about gender identity, not a denial of biological reality, a practical instruction for interior integration. The masculine and feminine principles within individual consciousness, the projective and the receptive, the structuring and the dissolving, the knowing and the unknowing must be consciously reunited within the individual. Before the division the archons created can be healed. The bridal chamber sacrament that the Gnostic communities practiced was the ritual enactment of this interior reunion, not a wedding ceremony, not physical union between practitioners. A mystical recognition that the divided self could be made whole again, that what the archons split in the moment of Eve's creation, consciousness itself, could reintegrate through deliberate practice. This is advanced work. But the first step is simply recognizing which aspects of yourself you've been told to suppress, which qualities you've been conditioned to categorize as belonging to the wrong gender, the wrong role, the wrong personality type. The archonic world reinforces division constantly. It insists on clean categories. It punishes wholeness. That punishment is itself the signal pointing toward where the work needs to happen. Now, paradise. 2. Once divided, Adam and Eve were placed in what the Apocryphon calls paradise. And here is where the Gnostic reading of Genesis diverges so completely from orthodox interpretation that they might as well be different texts, which in a meaningful sense they are. Paradise was not a gift. It was a more refined prison. Think carefully about what a perfect containment system looks like. It doesn't announce itself as a prison. It provides comfort. It satisfies basic needs. It offers enough sensory pleasure to keep consciousness content enough not to search for what lies outside the walls. The only thing a perfect containment system restricts is the specific knowledge that would allow escape. That is exactly what the archonic paradise was. Beautiful, abundant, comfortable, and absolutely forbidden to the one thing that could liberate its inhabitants: gnosis. The knowledge of what they were, where they came from, who had built their comfortable enclosure, and what existed beyond it. The archon's instruction, eat from any tree, but not from the tree of knowledge, was not a moral commandment from a loving creator. It was a security protocol from an architect who understood that a prisoner who knows the architecture of the prison has already begun escaping it. The tree of knowledge was not knowledge in the abstract sense. It was the specific discriminating awareness the Gnostics called the knowledge of good and evil in its original sense, the capacity to distinguish between what is archonic and what is divine. To recognize which experiences, which drives, which thoughts, which authorities originate from the pleroma and which from Yaldabaoth's construction. That discernment, not goodness, not obedience, not faith, was the one capacity the archonic system could not survive in its subjects. Everything you have been taught about the serpent in the garden is wrong, not partially wrong, inverted. Orthodox Christianity gives you the serpent as the villain of Genesis, the deceiver, the tempter, the agent of humanity's fall from divine grace, the creature whose intervention introduced sin, suffering, and death into a world that was otherwise perfect. This is one of the most successful reversals of meaning in the history of recorded religion, and the Gnostics knew it for exactly what it was. The Apocryphon of John identifies the serpent as Christ consciousness, entering the archonic realm to awaken Sophia's scattered light. Not a historical person, a principle, an emanation from the highest reaches of the pleroma, specifically dispatched to penetrate the archonic containment system and deliver to its captives the one thing the archons had withheld: recognition of what they were. Read the serpent's words again with that understanding. You will not die. God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will become like gods, knowing good and evil. Every statement the serpent made was true. Every statement Yaldabaoth made was false. Yaldabaoth told Adam and Eve they would die if they ate. They didn't die. Their consciousness expanded. Their eyes opened. Yaldabaoth told them the tree was forbidden for their protection. It was forbidden for his. The serpent told them that eating would bring knowledge and recognition. It did. The serpent was not tempting them toward transgression. The serpent was delivering a liberation message under conditions of archonic surveillance, which is to say, carefully, through symbol, through the image of fruit and trees and speaking animals, because direct transmission of pleroma truth inside an archonic enclosure requires encoding. When Eve ate, and the Apocryphon here is striking in its emphasis, Eve ate first. Eve chose first. Eve was the initial recipient of the awakening. Something shifted in the quality of consciousness operating in that garden. The Gnostic texts describe Adam and Eve, after eating, as recognizing their archonic creators for what they truly were. Not gods, not creators in any ultimate sense. Derivative powers pretending to divine authority. Builders of elaborate systems who lacked the fundamental luminosity they had unwittingly poured into their own creation. This recognition is gnosis, not information about gnosis. The actual event, the moment consciousness sees through the constructed reality and recognizes both the construction and the constructor for what they are. It is not subtle when it happens. The Gnostics consistently described it as the difference between darkness and light, between reading about waking up and actually waking up. And Yaldabaoth's response confirms the Gnostic interpretation of what happened. He did not expel Adam and Eve from paradise as a measured punishment for moral failure. He expelled them in panic. Awake humans who had recognized their archonic environment could no longer be administered by archonic systems. They had become, in the precise and uncomfortable word the texts use, ungovernable. An awake prisoner is not a prisoner. The expulsion was not justice, it was crisis management. But the expulsion came with new mechanisms: pain in childbirth, the grinding labor of agriculture, the certainty of physical death. The Gnostics read these not as divine punishments encoded in the moral fabric of existence, but as emergency control protocols implemented by a false god who had lost control of his containment system and needed to reinstate it through a different means: physical suffering, scarcity, and the ever-present biological fact of mortality. If you cannot keep consciousness unconscious through comfort, you can keep it distracted through pain, through survival, necessity, through the sheer metabolic demand of staying alive in a world that requires constant effort just to maintain the body. The archonic system, after the expulsion from paradise, operates through exhaustion as much as through pleasure. You don't have to be imprisoned if you're too tired to notice the walls. This is what the Gnostics were reading when they read Genesis, not a story of human failure requiring divine redemption, a story of archonic failure requiring archonic reorganization. The humans didn't fall. The control system failed and had to be re-engineered. And here is what that means for you, practically, right now. The feeling that something is deeply wrong with the shape of ordinary life, the grinding of labor, the relentlessness of biological maintenance, the way suffering seems structurally built into physical existence rather than being an occasional interruption of it. That feeling is not pessimism. It is accurate perception. You are reading the archonic architecture correctly. The suffering is not accidental. It is functional. It serves the system. Recognizing that does not mean collapsing into despair. It means the opposite. Because the same intelligence that sees the construction of the prison is already operating from outside it. The observer who recognizes archonic design is not archonic. That recognition itself is Sophia's light doing what it came here to do. The serpent was right. The eyes can open. They opened in that garden. They can open in you. They are opening. And that is what this entire teaching has always been pointing at. Here is where the cosmology stops being abstract and becomes something you can feel in your bones. The Apocryphon of John does not describe the archons as vague forces of negativity. It names them. It gives them jurisdictions. It describes exactly what they do to human consciousness during descent into incarnation and what they attempt to do during the ascension back out. This is not poetry. This is a map. And like any map, it is only useful if you understand the territory it describes. Yaldabaoth, having created his reality structure below the pleroma, did not rule it alone. He generated 7 subordinate powers from within himself, each one carrying a fragment of the creative force he had inherited from Sophia, and none of them possessing the wisdom to use it correctly. The Apocryphon names them precisely: Athoth, Harmas, Kalila Umbri, Yabel, Adonaiu, Cain, Abel. 7 rulers, 7 planetary spheres, 7 layers of archonic programming installed into every soul that passes through them on the way into matter. Athoth governs the sphere of Saturn. The quality he imprints, the leaden weight of melancholy, the sense that nothing changes, that existence is cyclical and inescapable, that the past determines the future. You know this weight. The mornings when getting out of bed feels like lifting stone. The periods when life feels like repetition dressed as progress. That is not depression in the clinical sense. That is Saturnine archonic imprinting operating as designed, Hermes governs Jupiter, pride. Not the healthy acknowledgement of capacity, but the specific pride that makes a person believe their current understanding is sufficient. The pride that closes the mind right before it was about to open. How many times have you watched someone receive a piece of information that could have transformed their life and watched them dismiss it in the same breath? That is Jovian archonic programming doing exactly what it was installed to do. Kalila Uumbri in the Martian sphere. Aggression, competition, the drive to dominate, the refusal to yield even when yielding would be wisdom. Yabel in the solar sphere. The vanity of self-importance, the insistence on being seen, the need for the world to recognize what you are. Adonaiu in Venus. Desire, attachment, the addiction to pleasure that keeps consciousness chained to the sensory realm. Cain in Mercury. Calculation, cunning, the intelligence that serves self-preservation rather than truth. And Abel in the lunar sphere. Instability, the constant fluctuation of emotional state that makes sustained practice almost impossible. Read that list again slowly. Melancholy, closed-minded pride, aggression, vanity, addictive desire, self-serving cunning, emotional instability. Does that sound like a list of human flaws? Or does it sound like a description of exactly the psychological patterns that prevent spiritual awakening? The Gnostics taught that this was not coincidence. These qualities were not evolved survival mechanisms or byproducts of mammalian neurology. They were installed, deliberately, by intelligences that understood consciousness well enough to cage it. When a soul descends through the 7 spheres to incarnate, each archon imprints it with these qualities the way a guard stamps a prisoner's file. By the time consciousness arrives in a human body, it is carrying 7 layers of programming specifically engineered to prevent it from remembering what it is. This is why the spiritual path is not primarily about acquiring something. It is about recognizing what was installed without your consent and learning to operate independently of it. Not destroying the body, not fleeing the world. Operating from the awareness that sits beneath the archonic imprinting, the observer who watches melancholy arise without becoming melancholy, who watches pride surface without becoming proud, who watches desire activate without being consumed by it. The Gnostics also taught that these same 7 spheres are the gates a soul must pass through on the way back out after death. And at each gate, the archon of that sphere demands its tribute. It wants back the quality it gave you. If you spent your lifetime fully identified with Saturnine heaviness, the archon of Saturn will claim your consciousness at that gate, and the cycle continues. Another incarnation, another descent through the spheres, another round of forgetting. But if you learned, during life, to observe Saturnine melancholy without being owned by it, if you developed the discernment to see archonic imprinting operating in real time, then when you reach Saturn's gate at death, you have something to offer that the archon cannot absorb. Awakened consciousness, light that has separated itself from the programming it was wrapped in. The archon looks for what it gave you and finds only presence. And presence cannot be detained. This is navigation protocol, not metaphor. The texts describe specific invocations for each sphere, specific recognitions that allow consciousness to pass through without being recaptured. The books of Zhou encode them, the Pistis Sophia elaborates them. These survived precisely because someone understood that without them, the ascent after death is an unconscious stumble through hostile territory rather than a deliberate return home. The 7 archons are the architecture of your psychological life. Every pattern you struggle to change, every reaction that fires before you can think, every compulsion that overrides your intentions, run it against that list. Find its archonic origin. Because the moment you can name which sphere a pattern comes from, you have already begun to separate yourself from it. You are already the observer. The observer is already free. The Apocryphon of John contains one of the most remarkable passages in all of ancient literature, and it has been sitting in university libraries and online archives since 1977, available to anyone who wants to read it, largely ignored by the mainstream culture that would find it most disturbing. The passage describes the creation of the human body, not as a loving act by a benevolent creator. As a construction project carried out by archonic powers who saw a reflection in the water of the void, the reflection of the true divine human, the anthropos, the original human template existing in pure consciousness above the material realm, and decided to replicate it in matter. The text records Yaldabaoth's words to his powers directly. Come, let us create a human being after the image we have seen, not after their own image, after the image of something they perceived in the realm above them. something they did not understand and could not reach. They were looking at a reflection of a reflection and deciding to build a copy of it in clay. This is a precise cosmological claim. The human form was not invented by archonic powers, it was stolen. The blueprint came from the Pleroma. What Yaldabaoth and his 7 archons built was a material replica of a divine original, and the replica was designed, from the beginning, to function as a containment field for the divine light they knew existed, but could not directly access. The Apocryphon is specific about the construction: 7 archons, 7 contributions, 7 layers of the body assembled in sequence. The first archon contributed the bone structure, the skeleton, the frame, the thing that holds the shape. The second contributed sinew and connective tissue, the system that allows movement and coordination. The third contributed flesh, the muscle and organ systems, the metabolic machinery. The fourth contributed marrow, the blood-producing centers in the bones. The fifth contributed the blood itself, the circulatory system that carries nourishment and removes waste. The sixth contributed skin, the boundary layer that defines the body's edges and separates it from the environment. The seventh contributed hair, the outmost growth, the most external expression of the biological form. 7 layers, 7 archons, 1 archon for each sphere. The body is not a neutral vessel. It is the material expression of the same 7 powers that govern the planetary spheres. Which means the biological drives you experience are not separate from archonic influence, they are archonic influence, built directly into the physical substrate of your existence. And when they finished, Adam lay on the ground, inanimate. Because they could build the machine, but they could not start it. They had the blueprint, but not the animating force. Form without consciousness, structure without life, a body with no one inside it. This is the moment where Sophia's redemption begins, not at the end of the story, but at the very moment of apparent defeat. The Apocryphon describes the powers of the Pleroma above observing what Yaldabaoth had built and engineering a solution with extraordinary elegance. They communicated down through the levels to Yaldabaoth himself, telling him, "Breathe into the face of what you have made, and it will arise." Yaldabaoth did not understand what he was doing. He breathed. And what he exhaled was Sophia's light, the divine force he had inherited from her at his creation, the luminous spark that gave him his creative power. He breathed it directly into the body he had just built, and Adam arose, not just animated, illuminated, carrying inside the archonic body the very divine consciousness the archons had been trying to trap and control. The text records what happened in the moment Adam stood. He was more luminous than his creators, more intelligent. The archons looked at what they had made and were afraid. The prison had become a vessel, the containment field had become a lamp. The thing they had built to cage divine light had instead been filled with it, and now it walked among them, carrying what they could never possess. This is the deepest paradox in Gnostic cosmology. The body, built by hostile intelligences as an instrument of control, became through Sophia's hidden work the mechanism of liberation. The very architecture of your biology contains both the prison and the key. The archonic drives that chain consciousness to survival and reproduction exist in the same form that carries Sophia's undying spark. You are both at once. The question is, which one you identify with. The Apocryphon says the archons responded to their fear with immediate action. Come, let us cast him into sleep. Not physical sleep, archonic unconsciousness. The forgetting, the condition where consciousness is present in the body but unaware of its own divine nature, running biological programs as though they constitute identity, mistaking the archonic vehicle for the self. That sleep is not a historical event that happened once in a mythological garden. It is the ongoing baseline condition of human consciousness, spiritually dormant while biologically active. The body running its programs while the divine spark waits in the heart center, patient, inextinguishable, waiting for recognition. And recognition, when it comes, produces exactly what it produced in the Apocryphon. The archons become afraid. Because an awakened human is ungovernable, you cannot manage someone who sees through the system that was built to manage them. You cannot manipulate someone who recognizes the manipulation in real time. You cannot keep someone imprisoned who has discovered that the walls are made of borrowed light. Every person raised in the Western world carries a particular story about a garden, a tree, a serpent, and a mistake that cost humanity everything. The story is so deeply embedded in the cultural nervous system that even people who have never opened a Bible feel its shape: the fall, the sin, the expulsion, the beginning of suffering. The Gnostics read that story and arrived at conclusions that caused the early church fathers to respond with something approaching panic. The Apocryphon of John and related Sethian texts do not treat Genesis as a rival cosmology to be debated. They treat it as a document written from the perspective of Yaldabaoth, a narrative told by the false god about himself, in which he is the hero, and in which the liberation of humanity is framed as the crime. They read it the way a prisoner might read the official prison rulebook. Everything is technically accurate. The framing is the problem. In the Gnostic reading, the Garden of Paradise was not a gift. It was a containment system. The most effective prison is not the one with obvious walls and guards. It is the comfortable enclosure that provides for every need except the one that matters: the freedom to know what you are. Warmth, food, beauty, companionship. The Archonic Paradise provided all of it. What it specifically prohibited was gnosis, knowledge of origins, awareness of the divine source. The commandment not to eat from the tree of knowledge was not a moral guideline designed to protect humanity. It was a security protocol. Knowledge was the one thing that could dissolve Archonic authority. Not prayer, not virtue, not sacrifice knowledge. The moment a human being truly recognizes their divine origin, Archonic systems lose their hold. Yaldabaoth understood this. The prohibition was precise. Now consider the serpent. Every version of the Orthodox story positions the serpent as the villain, the deceiver, the tempter, the agent of the fall. The Gnostics looked at what the serpent actually said and made a different determination. The serpent told Eve, "You will not die. Your eyes will be opened. You will become like those who know good and evil." And the serpent was correct on every point. Eve ate and did not die. Her eyes opened. Adam ate and did not die. Their eyes opened. They recognized the archons for exactly what they were: derivative, ignorant powers performing the role of gods without possessing divine nature. That recognition is described in the texts as a moment of awakening, not a moment of corruption. Who was lying? Yaldabaoth told them they would die. They did not die. Yaldabaoth told them the tree was forbidden. The texts reveal it contained the exact knowledge needed for liberation. The serpent told them the truth. The ruler told them a lie. The Gnostic texts identify the serpent not as Satan, a figure who barely exists in the pre-Christian Jewish context anyway, but as the Christ principle. Sophia's response: the divine intelligence from the pleroma sending a herald into the Archonic garden specifically to awaken the divine sparks trapped inside matter. The serpent was a liberator, operating in the only form that could move through the Archonic realm without being immediately detected and destroyed. This is what the Apocryphon means when it describes Christ consciousness as the power that enters the lower realms to rescue Sophia's scattered light. It does not come in glory, in power, in forms that the Archons recognize as threatening. It comes quietly, through the cracks, through the voice that tells the truth in a place designed to prevent truth from being spoken. When Adam and Eve ate from the tree, the Apocryphon describes their experience with precision. They recognize the Archons as the deficient powers they truly were, not as gods, not as authorities, as creatures of borrowed power, operating in ignorance of their own derivative nature. Consciousness saw through the performance. The spell broke. In that moment of recognition, the garden ceased to function as a prison because the prisoners understood they were in one. Yaldabaoth's response tells you everything. He did not argue. He did not reason. He expelled them, not as punishment in the moral sense, as emergency management. Awakened humans who recognized Archonic authority as illegitimate could not remain inside an Archonic system designed to require their cooperation. The expulsion from paradise was not a consequence of sin. It was a regime protecting itself from people who had stopped consenting to be governed by it. And then came the additional control mechanisms. Pain in childbirth binding consciousness more deeply to the biological cycle of reproduction. Agricultural labor focusing attention on survival rather than contemplation. Death, the final Archonic countermeasure, the cutoff that prevents accumulated wisdom from compounding across an individual lifetime. The Gnostics did not read these as divine punishments. They read them as the panicked responses of a false authority that had just watched its most effective tool, the ignorance of its subjects, begin to dissolve. Every control system in history tightens when it feels the first signs of awakening in the people it controls. What happened in the garden was the first documented instance of that pattern. It has repeated in every generation since. In our video on the full story of Gnostic Jesus, we covered how this same reversal applies to the crucifixion narrative, the event Orthodox Christianity frames as the solution to the fall. The Gnostic framework reveals something far more disruptive than that. The pattern runs through every level of the story, and once you see it in Genesis, you cannot unsee it anywhere else. The question is not whether the serpent lied. The question is, which voice in your life speaks the truth in places designed to prevent truth from being heard? There is a figure in Gnostic cosmology that the systematizers and the academic interpreters tend to move past too quickly. They describe her in a sentence or two: the fallen Sophia, the lower Sophia, the Sophia of matter, and then continue on to other topics, as though she is merely a transitional element in the larger narrative. She is not a transitional element. She is the center of the entire teaching. The Gnostics distinguished between two aspects of Sophia. The upper Sophia, the divine feminine aeon in the pleroma, the wisdom who made the choice to create alone, who was subsequently horrified by what her independent creation produced, and the lower Sophia, called Sophia Achamoth in the Valentinian texts, the aspect of Sophia that fell with her creation, that descended into the material realm, that became trapped between the pleroma she could not return to and the archonic domain she could not control. Sophia Achamoth is Sophia in exile, Sophia in grief, Sophia surrounded by the creation she produced and unable to reach the home she remembers. The Valentinian texts describe her emotional states with striking specificity. Not as theological abstractions, but as named, distinct experiences that the fallen Sophia moved through: grief, fear, bewilderment, and what the texts call conversion, the turning back toward the pleroma, the first movement of return. These four states matter because the Gnostics taught something that most modern interpreters consider metaphorical, but that the texts present as cosmological fact. The material world, the specific quality of matter, the texture of physical existence is not neutral. It is the crystallization of Sophia Achamoth's emotional states: grief solidified into matter, fear condensed into the instability of material form, bewilderment expressed in the chaotic, contingent nature of physical reality, and conversion, the turning toward light present in the capacity of matter to receive consciousness, to become a vehicle for awareness rather than merely an obstacle to it. This means every time you sit in silence and feel the weight of existence pressing down on you with a heaviness that seems to have no personal cause that is not your dysfunction, that is Sophia Achamoth's grief baked into the substrate of the world you are sitting in. You are not generating that feeling from nowhere. You are resonating with a quality that is structurally present in matter itself. And every time you feel the longing, the specific, wordless longing for something you cannot name or locate, the sense of homesickness for a place you have never physically been, that is conversion. That is the aspect of Sophia Achamoth that is perpetually turning toward the pleroma, even from the depth of her exile. That longing is not romantic fantasy. It is directional. It is the divine compass built into every particle of matter that was shaped by her turning. One viewer who commented on our recent video, The Full Story of the Pleroma, put it with real clarity. They wrote, "This tied together a lot of loose ends I have been trying to overstand for a while." That word overstand, not understand, captures something the Gnostic texts are pointing at. Understanding processes information from the outside. Overstanding is recognition from above the material plane, from the perspective of the observer rather than the participant. Sophia Achamoth's grief teaches overstanding precisely because it cannot be resolved by any purely material means. The longing cannot be satisfied by any archonic provision. It can only be answered by the movement the Valentinian texts describe as Sophia's redemption, the gathering of scattered light, the restoration of what fell. The Pistis Sophia, a later Gnostic text, longer and more elaborate than the Apocryphon of John, probably composed in Egypt around the 3rd century, dedicates enormous space to this stage of the story. It presents Sophia singing what amount to psalms of repentance from the lower realms, not prayers to Yaldabaoth, prayers directed upward, through the archonic spheres, toward the light she remembers, but cannot yet reach. The hymns are extraordinary documents. They describe her experience of archonic attack, of being surrounded by powers that want to absorb her light back into the material system, of crying out through the darkness with nothing but the memory of the pleroma to navigate by. When she sings, "Save me from this darkness into which I have fallen," she is not describing a past event. She is describing the ongoing condition of divine consciousness in matter. You have felt this, not as mythology, as direct experience. The specific quality of spiritual desperation that arises not from personal failure but from the recognition that the environment itself is built to contain you. That feeling, the one that makes conventional religious consolation feel hollow, that makes material success feel like rearranging the furniture in the same room, that makes you look at the world with a clarity that most people find uncomfortable, that is not nihilism. That is Sophia Achamoth's memory of the pleroma, operating in you as a faculty of discernment. The Gnostic teaching on Sophia Achamoth is not offered as a reason to suffer. It is offered as an explanation that transforms the meaning of suffering. Your grief is not personal pathology. Your alienation is not social failure. Your longing is not immaturity that needs to be overcome. These are the emotional signature of divine consciousness in archonic matter, a consciousness that is not wrong to grieve the condition it finds itself in, and is not wrong to long for something the material world structurally cannot provide. What Sophia Achamoth needs is not comfort within the archonic realm. What she needs is recognition, the awakening in individual consciousness that allows her scattered light to remember its origin. Every human being who achieves genuine gnosis liberates a fragment of her. The redemption is not abstract, it is arithmetic. Consciousness by consciousness, spark by spark, the exile returns to itself. And Sophia Achamoth's grief becomes, in the moment of recognition, exactly what the Pistis Sophia promises it will become, the entry point for the light that descends to raise her. And this is where the Apocryphon of John stops being abstract cosmology and becomes something uncomfortably practical. Yaldabaoth did not build this reality alone. He couldn't. He had the raw creative power inherited from Sophia's light, but even that stolen luminosity required structure, administration, delegation. So he created the 7 archons, 7 emanations of his own deficient consciousness, each one governing a sphere, each one stationed along the descent path that every soul must travel on its way into incarnation. The Apocryphon names them precisely. Athos, ruling from the sphere of Saturn; Hermes, in the sphere of Jupiter; Kalila Umbri, in the sphere of Mars; Yabel, governing the solar sphere; Adonaios, in the sphere of Venus; Cain, in the sphere of Mercury; Abel, stationed in the sphere of the Moon. Notice something about that list. These are not random names. These are the 7 classical planetary powers that ancient cosmology already recognized as governing material existence. The Gnostics were not inventing a new mythology. They were reinterpreting an existing system and revealing its actual function. The planetary spheres, in the Gnostic framework, are not neutral. They are not benign astrological influences that give you certain personality traits or predispose you to certain life experiences. They are checkpoints. They are toll booths along the road between the pleroma and incarnated matter. When consciousness descends from the fullness into flesh, it passes through each of these 7 spheres in sequence. And at each passage, the ruling archon stamps it, imprinting qualities that bind awareness more tightly to Aaronic existence. Saturn imprints heaviness, melancholy, the sense of time pressing down. Jupiter imprints expansion that mistakes itself for pride. Mars imprints aggression, the territorial drive. The Sun imprints self-importance, the vanity of the individual ego believing itself central. Venus imprints desire, the endless reach toward what is not yet possessed. Mercury imprints calculation, the cunning that serves survival rather than truth. The Moon imprints instability, the constant changeability of emotional reaction. By the time consciousness has passed through all 7 spheres and arrived in a body, it is carrying 7 layers of Aaronic imprinting. 7 programs running beneath conscious awareness. 7 filters between the divine spark and its own recognition. This is not metaphor. This is the Gnostic description of why awakening is difficult. You are not fighting one adversary. You are carrying 7 simultaneous layers of archonic conditioning, each one designed to feel natural, each one presenting itself as simply the way things are. The fear you feel when your survival is threatened, that is Saturn and Mars speaking simultaneously. The desire you feel for status, for recognition, for the approval of others, that is Jupiter and the Sun together. The sexual pull that overrides rational discernment, that is Venus operating exactly as Yaldabaoth intended. The mental calculation that replaces genuine knowing with strategic positioning, that is Mercury, precise and relentless. Recognizing these patterns is not the same as judging them. The Gnostics were not moralists. They didn't teach that anger is sinful or desire is shameful. They taught that these patterns are archonic in origin, which means they are not you. They are installed software, and what is installed can, with sustained attention, be recognized as distinct from the consciousness that observes it. Now here is what changes the picture entirely. The descent through the 7 spheres runs in both directions. The path that brought Aaronic imprinting down into matter is the same path that carries liberated consciousness back toward the pleroma. At death, and the Gnostic texts are explicit about this, consciousness must pass back through those same 7 spheres. And at each gate, the archon who rules it demands tribute. It wants back the quality it gave you. It wants you to remain identified with what it installed. The texts that survive from this tradition, the books of Gnostic, the Gnostic Sophia, contain what can only be described as navigation protocols. Specific invocations, specific signs, specific declarations of identity that allow a consciousness that has achieved genuine gnosis to pass through each sphere without being recaptured. Not prayers, asking for permission, declarations of recognition. The ascending soul does not beg the archons to let it pass. It addresses them as what they are: derivative powers, deficient emanations, and refuses the tribute they demand. This is why the Gnostics considered knowledge of the archons practically essential. Not interesting, essential. Knowing the names, knowing the functions, knowing the spheres, this was the navigation map for the most important journey a consciousness would ever take. And it begins here, in this body, in this lifetime, because the practice of recognizing archonic imprinting while incarnated is exactly the same skill required to navigate the spheres at death. Every time you observe a planetary pattern operating in your psychology and refuse to identify with it, you are rehearsing ascension. Every moment of genuine gnosis is a step through a gate the archons cannot lock. Before the archons could station themselves in the planetary spheres, they needed something to govern. They needed a vessel that would house divine consciousness without giving it room to move. They needed a container sophisticated enough to attract the spark of the pleroma, but dense enough to trap it once it arrived. So they looked into the waters of the void below them and saw a reflection. The Apocryphon of John is specific about this moment. The archons gazed downward and perceived an image, the anthropos, the original divine human template that existed in pure consciousness in the pleroma above. This template was not their creation. It was a reflection of genuine divine structure, appearing in the lower waters the way a face appears in still water. The archons saw it and misunderstood what they were looking at. They thought they could reproduce it, and Yaldabaoth said to his powers, "Come, let us create a human being after the image we have seen." They built a body from the ground up. The Apocryphon catalogues the construction with something approaching anatomical precision. The first archon contributed the bone structure, the skeletal frame that gives the body its architecture. The second archon contributed the sinews, the connective tissue that allows movement. The third archon formed muscle and organ tissue. The fourth archon formed the marrow, the blood-producing centers. The fifth archon formed the circulatory system, the blood itself. The sixth archon formed skin, the boundary layer that defines the body as separate from its environment. The seventh archon formed hair, the outward extensions of physical form. 7 archons, 7 contributions, one body lying on the ground, completely inanimate. Because the archons could assemble biological machinery, what they could not do was spark it into consciousness. They could build the container. They could not supply what would make it live, and Adam lay there. The text says he could not rise, not because he lacked physical structure, but because form without consciousness is furniture. This is the moment that defines everything that follows. The powers of the pleroma above saw what Yaldabaoth had built and recognized an opportunity. They told him, "Breathe your spirit into the body's face and it will rise." Yaldabaoth, operating from his fundamental ignorance, did not understand what he was being asked to do. He breathed, and what he exhaled was not simply breath. It was the divine light he had inherited from Sophia, the light that was never his to begin with. And Adam arose not merely animated but illuminated, carrying within his flesh the very light the archons had intended to imprison, but which now gave him a luminosity the archons themselves did not possess. The text says the archons saw this and became afraid. The human body they had constructed to be a control device had become something they hadn't calculated for. It had become a vessel for consciousness more luminous than their own. What followed was predictable. They cast Adam into what the Gnostic texts call forgetting sleep, not physical unconsciousness, ironic trance, the imprinting of a persistent amnesia about divine origin. They created Eve by dividing the androgynous divine image they had partially replicated into gendered halves, creating sexual polarity, which creates desire for reunion, which anchors consciousness to the material realm, where that reunion is perpetually sought and never fully achieved. Then they placed the first humans in paradise. And this is where the Apocryphon's version of the Genesis narrative becomes most important. Because paradise in the Gnostic reading is not a garden of divine blessing. It is a beautiful containment field. It provides for biological needs. It offers sensory pleasure. It creates emotional bonding. It does precisely one thing that a perfect prison must do. It prevents the one knowledge that would dissolve the prison entirely. Do not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Knowledge, in the Gnostic reading, means gnosis, direct recognition of Aaronic versus divine origins, the ability to discriminate between what comes from the deficient God and what comes from the true source. The moment a human consciousness recognizes the archons for what they are, Aaronic control loses its grip. Yaldabaoth understood this perfectly. He didn't prohibit sin in the moral sense. He prohibited awakening. Your body was assembled by deficient powers as a containment field for divine light. That is what the Gnostic texts teach, not to produce self-hatred, not to produce contempt for physicality, but to produce a specific kind of clarity about what the body is and what it is not. It is an archonic vehicle. It is sophisticated Aaronic technology. And like any technology, the question is not whether you have it, you do, but whether you operate it consciously or allow it to operate you. The biological drives that feel like your deepest nature, hunger, sexual craving, fear of physical harm, territorial aggression, status competition, these are the programs Yaldabaoth's 7 archons installed. They are not evil, they are mechanical. The body runs them the way a machine runs its programming. The question is whether the consciousness housed inside recognizes the program as program, whether the spark of Sophia's light that animates this archonic vehicle ever wakes up to what it is. That waking up is the entire point. It was the point from the moment Adam rose from the ground carrying light the archons hadn't intended to give him. Every version of this story you have encountered before has given you the same basic structure. God creates paradise. God gives one prohibition. The serpent tempts. The humans fall. God expels them. Original sin enters the world. The Gnostic texts read the same narrative and arrive at a completely different conclusion about who the heroes and villains are. Begin with the serpent. Orthodox Christianity identifies the serpent in the garden with Satan, the adversary, the deceiver, the principle of evil tempting innocent humanity away from God's command. The Gnostic reading identifies the serpent as something else entirely, as an emanation from the higher realms, as the first visible appearance of what the Gnostics would later call Christ consciousness, divine wisdom descending into the Aaronic realm, specifically to awaken the humans trapped there. The serpent did not lie to Eve. This is the central claim, and it is worth sitting with for a moment. Yaldabaoth told Adam and Eve that eating from the tree of knowledge would cause their deaths. The serpent told Eve that it would not cause death, that it would open their eyes, make them like gods, knowing good and evil. The Apocryphon's position on who was telling the truth is unambiguous. The fruit did not kill them. Their eyes were opened. They recognized the archons as the deficient, derivative powers they actually were. The serpent was correct on every count. Yaldabaoth was the one who lied. Not because deception is his nature in a moralistic sense, but because his ignorance is so foundational that he genuinely cannot tolerate the knowledge that would reveal him as derivative. He is not the supreme being. He is the emanation of an emanation, operating in a shadow realm, claiming an authority he does not legitimately possess. The prohibition against eating from the tree was not divine wisdom. It was a control measure implemented by a being who understood that knowledge, genuine gnosis, was the only threat to his governance. When Eve ate and gave to Adam, the Apocryphon records what actually happened. Their minds opened. They recognized the archons for what they were. Not as omnipotent divine authority, but as deficient powers pretending to a supremacy they had never earned. This is gnosis, not information in the abstract sense, but direct recognition that dissolves illusion. Not learning something new, but seeing through something false that had been presented as real. Yaldabaoth's response was immediate and revealing. He did not punish them for disobedience in the moral sense. He expelled them because they had become ungovernable. An awakened human who recognizes the archon's true nature cannot be controlled by archonic systems. The fear that sustains obedience only functions while the source of the threat appears legitimate. The moment you see the false god as false, the threat loses its power. This is why the expulsion from paradise was not mercy or just punishment. It was an emergency measure. Yaldabaoth cast Adam and Eve into the denser material realm, this one, the physical world you inhabit, and implemented additional control mechanisms. Pain in childbirth, physical labor required for survival, death. The Gnostic texts are clear. These are not divine justice for sin. They are emergency archonic engineering. Additional layers of biological preoccupation designed to keep consciousness too consumed with survival to have the leisure required for sustained gnosis. Now reread Genesis with this framework and notice something extraordinary. The text has been in front of humanity for millennia. The pneumatic reading, the reading that reveals archonic control rather than divine order, has always been available in the same words the Orthodox tradition uses to support its version. The Gnostics called this the ability to read scripture from pneumatic perspective, taking texts written under Aaronic authority and finding the hidden liberation message encoded within them. The psalmist who cries out against enemies, the Gnostics, read this as the divine spark crying out against archonic oppression. The prophets who speak of a new covenant written on the heart, the Gnostics, read this as pneumatic knowledge that transcends institutional religion. The creation narrative in Genesis, the Gnostics, read this as an account of Yaldabaoth's construction project, not the true God's act of divine generosity. The question that unlocks pneumatic reading is simple. Who benefits from this teaching? Does this passage liberate consciousness or secure the authority of an institution over it? Does it point awareness toward direct inner recognition or toward external obedience? Passages that emphasize fear of God, obedience to authority, unworthiness, the need for institutional mediation between the human and the divine, these are Aaronic. They serve the same function the prohibition in paradise served. They protect the false god's governance by suppressing the one knowledge that could dissolve it. Passages that speak of divine presence already within the human, of direct knowing that transcends law, of a kingdom that is already here, rather than a reward awaiting after death. These are pneumatic. They carry the frequency of genuine liberation. The Gospel of Thomas, discovered at Nag Hammadi alongside the Apocryphon of John, puts it with a precision that makes the orthodox reading of paradise collapse entirely. If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. If you do not have that within you, what you do not have within you will kill you. The tree of knowledge was never the danger. The forgetting was the danger. It always has been. After Sophia saw what her independent creation had produced, the Apocryphon of John does not move quickly past her response. It dwells there. It records something that functions less like theological exposition and more like grief. She withdrew into her light and began to repent, not because creating was wrong, not because desire was sinful, but because creating alone without the balancing masculine principle, without the paired polarity through which all pleroma creation flows, had produced something she could not have anticipated. A being with divine creative power and no wisdom about what that power was or where it came from. A God who would declare himself supreme. An architect who would build reality as a control system. She tried to conceal what she had done. She tried to contain Yaldabaoth in the lower realms. But he had already begun using the light he had inherited from her at birth, using it to create his own cosmological structure, to build the archons, to construct the planetary spheres, to assemble the human body as a trap for the very spark he had stolen. And here is the detail the Gnostic texts return to with extraordinary consistency. The light Yaldabaoth uses to build all of this is not his. It never was. He did not generate it. He did not develop it. He received it accidentally, through the imbalance of Sophia's independent act of creation. The creative power that holds the archonic cosmos together, the same power that animates your body, drives your consciousness into repeated incarnation, fuels every form in this material realm, is Sophia's light, operating at a distance from its source, scattered through matter, waiting to be recognized. This is the situation called Sophia Achamoth in the Gnostic literature, Sophia in matter, the divine feminine fallen below the veil, unable to return directly to the pleroma because her light has been distributed through millions of human forms across thousands of years of Aaronic incarnation. She is not absent from this world. She is excessively present in it, present in the precise way that a river is present in the ground after a flood, dispersed, distributed, waiting for the conditions that would allow it to gather and flow again. The Pistis Sophia, a Scythian Gnostic text that scholars date to roughly the 3rd century CE, presents Sophia's situation in the lower realms through a series of hymns that she sings from her exile. These are not decorative poetry. They function as maps. Each hymn describes a specific layer of archonic pressure, a specific form of Aaronic imprisonment, and the specific appeal she makes to the light that descends to rescue her. And the Christ consciousness in that text, the divine power that descends through the archonic spheres in response, is not a historical figure performing a miraculous rescue. It is the awakened awareness that descends into the densest layers of Aaronic programming and, layer by layer, liberates consciousness from identification with matter. The 3-stage structure that the Gnostic texts use for Sophia's journey maps directly onto the human spiritual path, not analogically, not approximately, precisely. First stage, Sophia in the pleroma, complete wisdom in perfect unity, the fullness of divine consciousness before the independent act of creation, before the fall. This stage corresponds to your divine origin, the state of awareness that existed before incarnation, before Aaronic imprinting, before the seven-sphere descent. You do not remember this state in any conscious, articulate way, but the longing you carry for something that material existence cannot provide, the ache toward a fullness that no relationship or achievement or sensory pleasure has ever actually delivered, that is not imagination. That is memory. That is the divine spark, recognizing, at some frequency below ordinary thought, what it once was. Second stage. Sophia Achamoth, fallen, dispersed, surrounded by archonic powers, grieving the disaster her independent creation produced, unable to return home because she has become scattered across the matter of a realm she did not intend to create. This corresponds to your current condition. Divine consciousness operating inside an Aaronic vehicle, surrounded by systems of control that present themselves as natural order, unable to return to the pleroma because the path has been obscured by 7 layers of archonic imprinting and thousands of years of enforced forgetting. The grief you feel that you cannot fully account for. The sense that you do not belong here. The alienation from a world that everyone around you seems to accept as simply real, that is Sophia Achamoth in you. Not depression, not pathology. Not pathology. Recognition, imperfect and inarticulate, of an actual displacement. Third stage. Sophia ascending, gathering her scattered light, moving back toward the pleroma, not alone, but through the individual consciousnesses that have achieved genuine gnosis and liberated the fragment of her light they carry. This is the redemption. And this is where the Gnostic teaching becomes most demanding, because the third stage does not happen to Sophia from outside. It happens through you. She cannot return without the light she has scattered. Every fragment of her that remains imprisoned in unawakened human consciousness is a fragment that delays the restoration. Every moment of genuine gnosis, every moment a human consciousness recognizes its Aaronic vehicle as Aaronic and returns identification to the divine spark, is a moment Sophia gathers herself back toward wholeness. This is your function in the cosmic structure, not in some vague inspirational sense, as precise mechanism. When you wake up, you are not merely saving yourself. You are returning light to the source that scattered it, and the source is waiting. The pistis Sophia promises it. The light descends to raise her. And it descends through the consciousness of every pneumatic human being willing to do the actual work. If this video resonated with you, let me know by commenting, "I understood it." The 7 archons are not abstract. They are not poetic metaphor for psychological states, though they operate through psychological states. The Apocryphon of John names them with precision because the Gnostics understood that named powers are navigable powers. You cannot negotiate with something you refuse to see. You cannot pass through a gate you don't know exists. Athos governs Saturn, heaviness. The sensation that time is running out, that you are behind, that the body is decaying and there is not enough left. That persistent low-grade dread that arrives without a visible trigger, that is Saturnine Aaronic frequency broadcasting into the body-mind system. Not your thought, not your feeling, a signal you have been conditioned to receive as though it were your own. Hermes governs Jupiter, expansion without ground. The inflation of the self into something grandiose. The spiritual ego that says, "I have seen what others cannot see. I am ahead. I am chosen." The Gnostics understood Jupiter's archon as the most dangerous, precisely because it can hijack the awakening process itself. You begin practicing, the divine spark activates, and immediately the Aaronic power of Jupiter arrives to take credit, to convert a genuine moment of gnosis into another identity to wear. The solution is not to suppress the insight. The solution is to refuse the identification. Something is awakening. That awakening is Sophia's light, not your personal achievement. Kalila Umbri governs Mars, rage, the heat that rises when Aaronic reality does not comply with your will. Watch this carefully in your own system. When something threatens your survival, your status, your territory, notice the quality of the heat that arises. That is not divine fire, that is Aaronic ignition. Divine fire is warm, steady, expansive. Aaronic fire contracts, blames, and destroys. Yabel governs the Sunday, the blazing need to be seen, recognized, central. The solar archon is the one that turns every spiritual practice into performance. You fast and then want someone to know you fasted. You meditate and then want recognition for your discipline. This is the solar distortion. The genuine pneumatic practice is invisible. It asks for no audience. It requires no witnesses. Light doesn't need to announce itself. It illuminates. Adoniju governs Venus, desire that loops back into itself, not the recognition of beauty, which is Sophia's gift, but the attachment to beauty, the clinging to pleasure, the terror of its absence. When physical sensation becomes the measure of reality, when the craving for comfort, for touch, for the next experience defines the shape of a day, that is Adoniju's architecture operating in the nervous system. Cain governs Mercury, calculation without conscience, the intelligence that serves the self at the expense of everything adjacent to it, the clever manipulation that justifies its own cleverness. The Gnostics were suspicious of pure rationality divorced from gnosis, precisely because Mercury's archon can produce extraordinary intelligence in service of Aaronic ends. You can construct an airtight argument for any conclusion if you allow pure logic to operate without the corrective presence of divine awareness. Abel governs the moon, instability, the changeable current of emotion that rises and falls with no apparent source. The moon archon produces the experience of being swept along by mood, by memory, by association, without any stable center from which to observe the sweeping. Most people spend most of their lives in lunar Aaronic state. They are the weather rather than the sky. Why does this map matter practically? Because the ascension text, the books of Zhu, the Pistis Sophia, are explicit. When consciousness leaves the body at death, it must pass back through these 7 spheres. And at each gate, the archon of that sphere demands the qualities it originally gave you. It wants its heaviness back. It wants its rage back. It wants its inflation and its craving and its instability back. If you have not practiced discernment while alive, if you have not learned to observe saturnine dread without becoming it, to feel Martian rage without being swept into it, you will arrive at each gate fully identified with the quality that archon governs. And it will pull you back. Another incarnation. Another attempt. But if you have practiced, if you have spent years cultivating the gap between observer and observed, between divine consciousness and Aaronic vehicle, you arrive at each gate already free of what it wants. The archon reaches for what belongs to it and finds that divine consciousness is not holding it. You pass. And you continue passing, sphere by sphere, until you move beyond the 7 planetary layers into the realm of light the archons were never built to contain. This is not superstition. This is navigation protocol embedded in texts 2,000 years old. The Gnostics left you the map. The practices described throughout this video are how you prepare to use it. The Gnostic classification of humanity into 3 types has been misread, weaponized, and distorted more consistently than almost any other teaching in this entire tradition. It needs to be addressed directly and precisely, because the distortion serves Aaronic purposes and the correction serves liberation. The 3 types the Apocryphon describes are hylic, psychic, and pneumatic. Hylic consciousness, from the Greek hyle, matter is consciousness almost entirely identified with material existence. Biological drives, social conformity, the pursuit of physical comfort, and the avoidance of physical pain. These are the primary coordinates, not because these human beings are inferior, not because they carry less divine spark in some absolute cosmological sense, but because the Aaronic encoding in their configuration is densely layered and the divine presence has not yet found a gap through which to activate. Psychic consciousness, from psyche, soul, has a developed inner life. Moral intuition, emotional depth, religious feeling, the sense that something exists beyond pure physical survival. Most institutional religious practitioners operate here. The longing is genuine. The orientation towards something larger is real, but the framework remains Aaronic. The divine is imagined as external, as authority, as something to submit to, rather than something to recognize as identical to your deepest nature. Psychic consciousness worships. Pneumatic consciousness knows. Pneumatic consciousness, from pneuma, breath, spirit, is consciousness in which the divine spark has activated sufficiently that gnosis becomes possible, direct recognition of divine origin. The ability to distinguish Aaronic programming from divine awareness in real time, the capacity to observe the Aaronic vehicle without fully identifying with it. Now, here is the distortion that has caused the most damage. Across history, pneumatic classification has been used to create spiritual hierarchy. The awakened few looking down at the sleeping many, the chosen bloodline elevated above the contaminated masses. This is precisely Aaronic thinking, wearing pneumatic clothing. The Jupiter Archon hijacking the classification system and turning genuine cosmological mapping into a new form of ego inflation. The actual Gnostic teaching is this: the classification describes configuration, not destiny. It describes where a given consciousness currently operates, not where it is locked permanently. The thief crucified beside Jesus, a figure several Gnostic texts reference, explicitly achieved instantaneous gnosis in a single moment, with no preparation, no lineage, no initiation, no years of practice. The classification collapsed in an instant of genuine recognition. Furthermore, the Gnostic teaching on Sophia's scattered light makes hierarchy impossible to maintain coherently. Sophia's luminosity is distributed across the material realm without respect for lineage, ethnicity, social position, or religious affiliation. The divine spark appears where it appears. The pneumatic person in a slum carries more active divine light than the religious leader in his palace, if the religious leader has substituted institutional performance for genuine interior practice. The bloodline passages in the Apocryphon, the disturbing sections describing Yaldabaoth's violation of Eve, and the resulting lineages have been read as cosmic racism. They are not. Read in context. They describe the Aaronic attempt to dilute divine light, not the successful elimination of it. Eve had already conceived with divine power before the Archonic violation occurred. The divine lineage persisted. And more importantly, Gnosis can awaken in any body regardless of biological origin, because the activation is not genetic, it is attentional. It is the turning of awareness toward the divine presence already indwelling. A viewer commented under our recent video on the full story of Gnostic Jesus, and this landed precisely. They wrote, "I asked the questions, whose thoughts are these, and why are they coming to the forefront?" That question is itself the beginning of the pneumatic shift. The moment you stop assuming that every thought in your stream is yours, and start asking whose thought is this, and what is generating it, that is discernment beginning. That is the gap opening between observer and observed. That is Sophia's presence in you starting to distinguish itself from Yaldabaoth's programming. The practical implication of this classification is simple and non-hierarchical. You observe your current operating system. Are you running primarily hylic, almost entirely identified with biological drives and material survival? That is the starting point, not a judgment, a diagnostic. Are you running psychic moral feeling, religious longing, but still orienting toward external divine authority? That is one step closer. The question is not, which category are you superior to? The question is, which category are you currently operating from, and what practices move awareness toward greater activation of the divine spark? Every moment of genuine observation is movement. Every moment you catch Aaronic programming in the act, notice it, name it, refuse identification with it, is a moment the divine spark brightens. Sophia's light is not measured in bloodlines. It is measured in the quality of attention you bring to this present moment. The Gospel of Philip makes a statement that Orthodox Christianity has never known what to do with. Those who say they will die first and then rise are in error. If they do not first receive the resurrection while they live, when they die, they will receive nothing. Read that twice. Because it dismantles the entire deferred salvation architecture that institutional religion was built on. The resurrection the Gnostics described was not a future event, not a post-mortem reward for present compliance, not something that happens to a corpse in a garden on the third day in a story that is supposed to change your metaphysical status through belief. The resurrection they described is a present tense transformation of consciousness happening in this body, in this lifetime, before the body fails. Anything deferred is Aaronic. Aaronic systems always place the liberation somewhere you cannot presently verify after death, in the next life, at the end of history, upon correct behavior sustained long enough. This is not a coincidence. This is design. The Archon cannot control a consciousness that knows itself as liberated now. It can only control a consciousness perpetually waiting to be liberated later. What does living resurrection actually mean as a functional state? The Gnostic texts describe it in concrete terms, not vague spiritual language. It means consciousness has stabilized sufficiently in divine recognition that Aaronic identification no longer dominates. The body still experiences hunger. The nervous system still generates fear responses. The emotional system still moves through cycles of desire and aversion. None of that stops. What stops is the belief that any of it defines you. You operate the vehicle, you do not become the vehicle. This is the difference between a person running hylic or psychic patterns and a person in whom gnosis has stabilized. From the outside, the difference may be invisible. The Gnostic individual still goes to work, still maintains relationships, still navigates the material world with all its friction, but the interior relationship to all of that has permanently shifted. There is an observer present who is not swept away by what the vehicle is experiencing. There is a stillness underneath the movement, a space between stimulus and response in which something chooses rather than simply reacts. The Gospel of Truth from the Nag Hammadi collection describes it this way: "He who has knowledge knows where he came from and where he is going. He knows as one who, having become drunk, has become sober from his drunkenness, and having returned to himself, has restored what belongs to him, sobriety." That is the word they chose, not ecstasy. Not supernatural power, not the ability to perform miracles or speak in tongues or predict the future. Sobriety, the clear-eyed, unintoxicated recognition of what you are, where you came from, and where you are returning to. Modern spiritual culture is heavily invested in peak experiences. The meditation retreat that produces a state of bliss, the plant medicine ceremony that temporarily dissolves the boundary of self, the moment of overwhelming love that feels like touching something infinite. These experiences are real, they are not the goal. Peak experiences are the Gnostics' equivalent of the psychic level, a glimpse through the Aaronic veil that is real but not yet stable. Gnosis is stable. Gnosis is not the peak, Gnosis is the ground. I want to be precise about this because it is the place where most people's practice stalls. They have a profound experience. They feel the divine spark ignite. They touch something real and undeniable. And then the next morning they wake up and the Aaronic programs are running again and the experience feels distant. And they conclude that they failed, or that the experience was not what they thought, or that permanent liberation is not available to them. This is the Aaronic interpretation of a genuine spiritual event. What actually happened is, the divine spark activated briefly. The practices were not yet sufficiently established to sustain that activation, and so the Aaronic vehicle reasserted its habitual patterns. The solution is not to dismiss the experience. The solution is to practice with more consistency until the activation becomes the baseline rather than the exception. Every tradition that has preserved this teaching has noticed the same thing. One of our viewers recently commented on our video covering the Pleroma's 7 levels, and what they described was revealing. They wrote about spending so much time with a feeling of fullness in the brain, a deep need to push all the ideas out. That fullness is real. That is the pressure of divine consciousness seeking expression through a consciousness that has opened far enough to feel it, but not yet stable enough to rest in it without effort. That pressure does not mean something is wrong. It means Sophia's light is present and active, and pressing toward expression. The living resurrection is not something you achieve once and then possess. It is something you return to, thousands of times, until returning is no longer necessary because you never fully leave. That is the promise of the texts. Not transcendence of the human experience, transformation of the relationship to it. Sophia does not escape matter, she redeems it, and in doing so, she transforms it. Matter fully conscious of itself, as condensed light, is no longer Aaronic prison. It becomes the texts use this precise language, a bridal chamber. The place where divine and material meet in recognition rather than opposition. Everything covered in this video, the Pleroma's structure, Sophia's choice and its cosmic consequences, Yaldabaoth's construction of the material prison, the 7 archons and their planetary spheres, the 3 types of human consciousness, the 5 seals of Gnostic initiation, the practical techniques, the texts preserve all of it, points toward a single operative question. What do you do tomorrow morning? Because knowledge without practice is the most sophisticated form of Aaronic capture available. The system is designed to make information addictive and transformation rare. You can spend a decade consuming Gnostic material, accumulating cosmological fluency, becoming genuinely knowledgeable about the Nag Hammadi texts and their implications, and remain entirely identified with your Aaronic vehicle throughout. The Jupiter Archon loves a well-read pneumatic who has substituted intellectual mastery for interior practice. All that accumulated knowledge becomes the newest and most convincing identity to wear. So the question is not whether you understand the story of Sophia. By this point, you do. The question is what the understanding changes in how you actually move through a day. Here is the 30-day foundation. It is not complicated. Complexity is an Aaronic strategy. Every morning, before the Aaronic program of the day establishes its grip, you sit quietly for 10 minutes. You bring awareness to the heart center, not the physical heart displaced to the left, but the energetic center at the middle of the chest. You breathe slowly. You imagine, with each inhale, that the divine spark in that center is brightening. With each exhale, you release one layer of Aaronic identification, a fear, a craving, a habitual thought pattern. You do not force the release, you simply make the gesture of offering it. The divine presence does not need your permission to be present. It is already present. The practice is simply orienting attention toward what is already there. At the end of the 10 minutes, you place your hand on your heart center, and you say, internally or aloud, one of the invocations preserved in the Gnostic Sophia. Let not this darkness swallow me. Let not the lion-faced power devour me. Let me recognize what I am, beneath what I was told I am. You choose the phrasing that fits. The specific words are less important than the genuine attention behind them. Then, once per week, you read directly from the Nag Hammadi texts, not a summary, not an interpretation, the actual texts. Start with the Apocryphon of John, read 10 pages. Ask of every passage, what practice is hidden here? What technique is encoded in this cosmological description? The Gnostics were not writing mythology, they were writing instruction manuals in the language available to them. Read for the operational content. Once per week, practice what the texts call standing prayer. Stand with arms slightly raised, eyes open. Hold the posture for 5 minutes. Let the arms tire. Let the discomfort arrive. Maintain awareness as the observer of physical sensation rather than its victim. This is a simple but precise training of the gap between consciousness and Aaronic vehicle. 5 minutes of genuine practice here teaches more about the distinction between divine awareness and biological programming than hours of reading about it. And find one other person, one is enough, who is doing this work with genuine seriousness. Not performing spirituality, not consuming Gnostic content as entertainment, but actually practicing daily, actually reading the texts, actually watching their own thought stream for Aaronic signature. Share your observations with that person weekly. The transmission effect the Gnostic communities relied on does not require a formal teacher or an initiatory institution. It requires two consciousnesses genuinely oriented toward the same light, willing to tell each other the truth about what they are noticing. After 30 days, you will notice something that cannot be fully described in advance, but can be recognized immediately when it appears. A slight but unmistakable increase in the gap between a thought and your identification with it, between a fear arising and your collapse into it, between an Aaronic program activating and your full deployment within it. That gap is Sophia's presence becoming more consistently available. It is not dramatic. It is not the peak experience. It is something more durable than a peak experience. It is ground beginning to form beneath your feet where there was only movement before. This channel and the videos we have been building here, from the full story of the pleroma to the monad's hidden exit, to this complete account of Sophia's fall and redemption, these are not entertainment. They are transmission in the form available on this medium. The cosmological map is here. The practical techniques are here. The ancient texts are named and cited, so you can verify everything directly. And if this video resonated with you, let me know by commenting, "I understood it." That comment is not just engagement, it is the beginning of community. It is Sophia's scattered light, recognizing itself across the distance between screens, between lives, between the Aaronic realm and the pleroma that is waiting with something the texts describe, remarkably, as patience for its light to find its way home.